Presenting now is Anthony Benici, the director at Move Mountains. Anthony will be discussing brain blinkers, identifying and removing your mental barriers to success.
Well, hello there. I'm Anthony Benici, and it's my pleasure to be speaking with you here for this very short period of time at the Emergence Summit. So when I started my small little business 16 years ago, and I had dreams of working for myself and sharing a little bit of knowledge about leadership and removing mental barriers with people, I had beliefs myself that were in the way of my success. Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I really an expert in this thing? Do I have what it takes? All of those nagging thoughts. And what we know and what cognitive behavioral psychology has taught us and continues to teach us is that it's usually these mental barriers that are actually quite more significant than the market or access or price or product barriers that we have for our brands and our businesses right around the globe. So what I want to show you today, and I'm going to use this unique style of show and tell here that I've developed obviously during the COVID crisis, feeling a little bit like the weatherman here. My little thing for the last 16 years has really focused on identifying and then removing what we call brain blinkers. Okay, so if you're in America, brain blinders, but I guess the UK, Australia and New Zealand, we call them blinkers. And you think of a horse. Horses have blinkers on in order that they can focus, go straight really quickly, and not be distracted about what's going on around them, yeah? Particularly the other horses that are very close to them as they're in that race for the finish line. Now, brain blinkers in that regard, when you're focusing on something, are really helpful. The trouble is long-term, even medium-term really, these things, these blinkers can get in the way of us seeing opportunity, seeing what's possible, seeing potential, both in ourselves, our product, our market, and in others. And so what we're going to cover really quickly today, and obviously not going to be able to go into the whole depth of the content of brain blinkers, but I want to give you a taste for it in this short time, give you some nuggets to help you identify the things that are in your way of success. Because what we know from behavioral psychology, limiting beliefs, and if you're taking notes, these are the three things to write down. Limiting beliefs, which we'll focus on a little bit, self-sabotage, and I represent that with a cup of coffee. We're not going to get into that today, but it talks about 6 ways. So it's an acronym, COFFEE, for 6 ways that we self-sabotage. So limiting beliefs, self-sabotage, and the last one, we've all been there, we've all freaked out, probably on a daily basis about various things. It's how we fear, how we stress, how we overwhelm. Limiting beliefs, self-sabotage, and fear are our brain blinkers that get in the way of us living long, happy, and high-performing lives. So I've been doing this for 16 years, as I've said, right around the globe. And no matter what culture, no matter what industry, I've worked in a plethora of industries, these things hold true. They get in our way of us, whether an entrepreneur, a founder, an investor, a business owner, a leader, whoever we are, getting in the way of us being successful. So I want to focus on this part, how these, the identification and then the removal of these brain blinkers can affect how we perform. And how do we do that? Well, let's just focus on this one in this session, right? Limiting beliefs. So let's go there. One of the core tenets of behavioral psychology is this: what you hold true will always directly affect how you think and thus how you behave. Now, what we also know, so if you think of a big arrow going down this way, believe, think, behave, that cascade, that neurological cascade. What we also know is that it works in reverse. So in fact, if you want to change a self-belief, go to your behavior and act that way until the belief changes. And that's the old fake it till you make it. Now, enough about that. We could go into hours just on that particular topic. What we want to focus this today on is this notion of, if I've got a behavior that I want to change, how should I do it? Well, most of us focus on the behavior, and I'll use road rage as an excellent example of this. It was very relevant for me in my 20s. I was really upset on the road. And what I noticed is that people who weren't doing the same thing as me, being courteous on the road, disobeying the road rules, etc., I would get really, particularly angry with. And so I was thinking, okay, I've got to be more patient on the road. That's the way to fix this. So I'm focusing here on the behavior. It didn't work. And it was nagging me as a semi-intelligent person. Why wasn't my behavior changing when I'm focusing? I'm aware that I've got a behavior that needs to change. I'm focusing on it. So why isn't it working? And it seemed to be rubbing up against something really fundamental. So if you're following this, it makes sense, right? If you want to change a belief, if you want to change a behavior, go back to the belief that is behind it, that is driving it, pardon the pun. And for me, just to use this as by way of example, the belief that I held that was actually perpetuating my road rage, the behavior, was this one belief. Now, if you get angry on the road, and I'll ask you the question now, if you get angry on the road and you want to change it, you want to improve, you want to knock it down a notch or two, identify the belief that's behind it. And for me, and I'm not saying this is your belief, but me, it was people should drive like me. And the moment I became conscious of that belief, I remember thinking, that's actually pretty crazy. Because people aren't like me. Some people are, some people are not. So on the road, I remember for 2 months straight, I embedded a new belief that I wanted to drive my behavior, which was get in the car, hands on the steering wheel, start the car and say, people don't drive like me. I'm in control of me. That's it. And if I'm using a rating of, 9.5 out of 10 anger, I dropped that for me, not anyone else. I dropped that level of anger from about a 9.5 to now currently at nearly 50 years of age, I'm probably about 3.5. Do I get annoyed with people who do the wrong thing on the road, their behavior? Sure. But I no longer get really upset. So this particular cascade is at the heart of what the Brain Blinkers methodology works on, which is if you want to shift a behavior, go back to the belief that is driving it. And the data on this is interesting. London College did a proper research to find out that it takes about 2 months, on average, 2 months, 66 days to be precise, but with a range of between 2 weeks and 9 months between that range. So for you, if you might be lucky in 2 or 3 weeks be able to change the behavior, but for most people, it's a couple of months. And that's consistent shifting of belief, consciously shifting the belief to say, I no longer hold that limiting belief true. So what's some examples? Well, these are examples of limiting beliefs that come up in my sessions, no matter where I am in the world, virtually, face-to-face, just about all the time. People say they can't draw, or they're hopeless at maths, or they're hopeless at remembering people's names. This is an interesting one. You might be one of the people that say, hey, I'm great with faces, but bad with names. If that's you, write down an example, or that example, as a limiting belief. What we're talking about here, folks, are limiting beliefs. And as an entrepreneur, limiting beliefs can be insidious. You may not be aware of them. In my workshops, this is the point where I list a couple like this and I see people laugh and I see people get involved. But then I say, identify your own ones. Now, it might be up here. That's great if it is. But if it's not, have a think about the belief you're holding about whatever it is in your life that you want to be successful at. And then write it down. Identify it, write it down, because then you're one step closer towards removing it. I'm no good with change. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, that might not be yours, but the people working for you might be really stuck in their old ways. There's too much to do, the overwhelming, there's too much to do. I've got no time to exercise, that sort of thing. The market is tough. Of course it is. We've just been through COVID. So in order to emerge, in order to be at our best, the identification of these things, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just by way of example of a couple of limiting beliefs that I find are really common with people, not just as entrepreneurs, leaders of people, salespeople, business development, HR, engineering, it doesn't matter. The message here is identify the things that hold you back so you can do something about them. Now, I mentioned a few other things here. I'm just going to briefly touch on them, but not go into any detail. There's lots more detail I can provide to you. We've got some really good resources I'll show you right there. The coffee model is quite simply an acronym for 6 ways that we self-sabotage. And what we're talking about here, really simply, is how we talk ourselves into certain things without even knowing it. It's that little devil on the shoulder type of thing. And in the book, in our online program, you'll learn more about this. We talk about catastrophizing, making things worse than they are, overgeneralizing, putting people or things in a box, filtering, choosing to hear certain things only, usually only negative stuff, forecasting or predicting failure before it has the chance to arrive, emotionalizing, so taking things personally. And the last one in this coffee model, remember, COFFEE, the last E is around effectualizing. It's not a word, I made it up about 16 years ago, but it's all around the concept of how to be at the effect of things rather than the cause. The Oz principle is the model behind that. So that's just a snapshot of the things here under self-sabotage. Finally, we talk about fear. There's two wonderful models that we're not going to go through today, but understanding how the adrenal model, so when we get worked up, how adrenaline changes what is going on, reducing the amount of blood supply to the head and the torso, changes the way we can process things cognitively. So of course we need to modulate this effect. Here's the rub. Hopefully, even in this short time we've been together so far, you've been able to think about, or even I've stimulated you to think, what are the beliefs that I hold that might be in my way of all the good stuff? With a little bit more work with you, we could work on things, methods of self-sabotage and fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the uncertain mess of a market everyone is in at this moment in time. So there are three blinkers in our way. And the question is, what do we do about it? And the model we have is called the acid test. Now, I'm not going to get into any detail of that today. It's about identifying those limiting beliefs and freeing yourself from them. It's 4 steps, starting with, it's an acronym, ACID. A is for awareness. Today, folks, what I wanted to do is to help you become aware of some of the things that might be in your way of achieving greatness, of making the business grow, of stimulating change in the organization, in your small business, to make things happen. And, you know, you've read enough books now to understand the principles of entrepreneurship. Starting with self, starting with you is the key. Now, I'd love to be able to do much more work with you on this whole Brain Blinkers program. We have an online program that is just outstanding. It's essentially me, 2-camera, doing heaps of videos, modular format, and taking you right through the limiting beliefs, the self-sabotage and fears with a really practical exercise, a fun exercise in there as well. There are 42 instructional videos, there's audio books. It's basically a whole portal for the Brain Blinkers methodology. It's a wonderful program. We've got magnificent pricing on it. You wait and see. Just go to the details I'm going to show you right now and you'll see a lot more. Been really fortunate to work with many different people and organizations right around the globe. Some of whom, of course, you no doubt work with, have maybe been involved with in the past. But this is all testament to the fact that it's not just about one thing. I believe it's around awareness of self. And that's why, here are my contact details, folks. I want you to use anthonybonici.com. Send me an email at ab@anthonybonici.com. And for the Brain Blinkers online program, just head there. You can also look at brainblinkers.com. We've got that all set up for you there. On LinkedIn and Twitter, I do a fair bit of work, so I'm always posting. It would be lovely to connect with you. And I trust that this last sort of 15 minutes has helped you identify some of the things that are in your way of being at your best. Whether you're starting a business, whether you're growing a business, but either way, you're emerging into the market to be better, to be bigger. And that's the journey I'd love to help you with. Thanks very much, folks. Look forward to working with you again soon.
It's our pleasure to now introduce a sponsor of Emergence 2021, Invest Hong Kong, a department of the Hong Kong government responsible for attracting foreign direct investment and supporting overseas and mainland businesses to set up and expand in Hong Kong. Today they are represented by Head of Innovation and Technology, Andy Wong.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. My name is Andy Wong. I'm from Invest Hong Kong, headquarters Hong Kong. And it's very good for me to be here to present the window of opportunity about Hong Kong. To start with, I would like to make an introduction about how Hong Kong looks like. First of all, Invest Hong Kong is a government agency to help company, particular for foreign company, to set up their office in Hong Kong. What we do promotion, we do attraction, And by the time the company who want to set up the activity in Hong Kong, we provide all the support that the company need. Our agency divided into different sectors. For example, you can see that we do have sector who focus on professional service, creativity industry, etc. And for my team, I look after innovation and technologies. We have an office all over the world. You can see that in Europe, Asia, South and North America, including Sydney. So we're lovely to see you to set up your office or your business in Hong Kong. One of our key differentiation is that we have a very good relationship with different ecosystem partner, including the government, of course, and also university for the design, technology park, research institution, chambers, association, big four accounting firm, consulting firm, all the strategic corporate in Hong Kong, incubator, as well as investor in Hong Kong. So what makes Hong Kong to be unique for people who are doing the business? We do offer a very, very friendly environment for doing the business in Hong Kong. I think there's a couple of highlights I want to show here. One is about the location of Hong Kong. Unfortunately, because of the COVID, so we can't fly. But once we open the border, we can be the normal. So within 5 hours, we can cover a half population of the world from the flight to different area. We do have the local bridge to different area linking to the China. We offer simple and no tax system. For anything earned less than 2 million Hong Kong tax, we only charge 8.25%. Above that is 16.5% for the profit tax. We don't have a VST, GST, sales tax, capital gain tax, etc. For the capital fundraising, we have number one in terms of the fundraising for the last 10 years, for the last 6 years, for the last 10 years. And we also be the second largest IPO globally for the biotech systems. We have a very good IP system, registration, protection, asset management. For the registration, we do adopt the dual registration process. It can be re-registration, full re-recognition with other different jurisdiction, or we can do the original grant patent. Very good protection because we rely on the legal system in Hong Kong and the asset management for IP because of the low tax rate in Hong Kong. And also the more reduced kind of expenditure to maintain the patent. GBA stands for the Greater Bay Area. Hong Kong has a population of 7 million. With the GBA combining the city in mainland China, in the nearby city closer to Hong Kong, we can increase the population to 71 million, which is 10 times the market opportunity. And in terms of the GDP, is already similar to Australia. And we have a very vibrant ecosystem startup, including the bio incubation program, acceleration program, very experienced angel fund in Hong Kong, Hong Kong backed kind of program, and also community of startup. Mention about the single tax, right? So Hong Kong, Singapore, China, you can see the corporate tax, we are the lowest in terms of the corporate tax, personal tax, as well as VAT. VAT is zero in Hong Kong anyway. So in terms of the leading capital fundraising for the IPO, I think it's quite well known. But I think we want to highlight is why in Hong Kong, because of accessibility in Hong Kong for those global investor, top tier corporate, and the proximity to mainland China. Very creditable because you can find all those professional firms in Hong Kong for the lawyer, the banking, the audit firm, all in Hong Kong who can ensure everything is credit. Sustainable because we are not just 1 year of number one, but we are consistent for many years to be number one in terms of the market size for fundraising. And then last is about the adaptability. Two things I want to highlight, particularly for the biotech company. We adopt a chapter called 18A, which requires pre-revenue, pre-profit kind of scheme for biotech company because we understand the journey will take a long time for the biotech company to make profit. So we adopt the pre-revenue, pre-profit kind of scheme to enable qualified biotech company to be listed in Hong Kong. And also we adopt a weighted voting right for new economy company, which is not the same share to have the voting right. skip this one. For the innovation and technology in Hong Kong, we have different subsectors. One is called biomedical, pharmaceutical, the other semiconductor, robotics, smart city, telecom, IT, and big data. Under each one, we do have a government subsidies for each one. And also, say, for example, in the biomedical, we have a Hong Kong Genomes Institution, which recently set up last year. Is going to collect 40,000 patient data in terms of the full sequencing genomes analysis to enable the research and development in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is quite well known for those two medical schools in the university, as well as a world-class clinical trial hub in Hong Kong. For the robotic and semiconductor, we have set up research institute between different universities to conduct the research in the AI and robotics. And also we have different kind of funding and also the R&D facility available in Hong Kong. Smart city, we cover mobility, living, environmental, government, people. Telecom, we are already 5G enabled in Hong Kong. So the telecom network in Hong Kong is very secure, solid, and can be said is cheapest almost in the world. And then we have a very big data driven by the government. For the smart city, we just recently launched a Blueprint 2.0. It covers mobility, which is EV, AV, smart airport, green transportation, smart living. We do have an EID, which means that you have apps which we can download, and then it's more like a single sign-on. So we enable people who just fill in one form, and then can connect to different government departments without filling the form again and again. And we have a very good electronic healthcare record in the hospital, so we can leverage that for any R&D. Environmental, we are really driving the decarbonization. We have a commitment to carbon neutral by 2050. And also we have a smart government, open data, smart city network, 5G enabled, government-wide IoT, etc. Carbonization, we are committed to 2050 to be carbon neutrality. And we have our climate action plan for 2050, which is published in 2017, but we are going to do more this year. We'll have another round of action plan for this year. And what are the building blocks for the innovation? I can see that driving from key component. One is R&D facility. The other is about the business friendliness. I mentioned about the low tax rate, for example. We have different talent from those top universities in Hong Kong, funding available by the government. Product launch, the government will also have something called innovation procurement policy to enable the people, the government department to purchase more technology-oriented product or service, and the GBA as well. So we have 2 technology park, science park, cyberport, plus 6 institutions. Each one will be responsible for different things, like, for example, supply chain or the advanced materials. The technology transfer office from the university is highly to drive the more basic research into commercialization through the model like IP licensing, sponsorship, collaboration project, and also consultancy available for any company who want to work together with the university. About the funding, so you can see that we have a massive kind of funding available to drive the innovation, including some matching fund, 1-to-1 matching fund, tax deduction for the R&D expenditure, cash rebate for anything related to R&D expenditure. We are up to 40% of cash rebate, and also some subsidies for people who in the salary for subsidization, whoever doing the R&D function. The last topic I would like to cover is about the GBA, right? So the GBA overall is talking about 9+2 city. You may have heard of Hong Kong, right? But in addition to Hong Kong, we have Macau, which is a very luxury for tourism kind of city, plus 9 cities in mainland China. So combined together, we are talking about 70 million of people, 1.7 trillion GDP, which is about 11% of China total. The whole idea is that we want to bring the synergy among those different cities to drive innovation, livability, international competitiveness. So what's the role for Hong Kong to play? As you can see on the map, right? So these are the 11 cities. Different color representing the different GDP. As you can see that Hong Kong is the red color, which is high GDP. Together with Macau is high GDP. But the nearby city, Shenzhen, is already high. But we are going to combine with Shenzhen, for example, to build an international INT, Innovation and Technology Hub, with Guangzhou to become a sales center. We want to combine with other Zhuhai, Macau, to become a financial center, to become an entertainment center. We want to combine with other cities to drive it for more manufacturing, power-based trading and logistic usage. As you can see, by leveraging the GBA, you can have a lower cost and rapid prototype can be made, massive manufacturing scale available, and the world-class container throughput. Last is to talk about the GBA through Hong Kong to go global, or from global through Hong Kong to GBA, which is using as a gateway. So the government policy will be the key one to drive it. The talent I mentioned before, the facility available in the science park or other research institution, access to capital through the Hong Kong fundraising capital, and also the very good business environment, including manufacturing, IP protection, low tax system, and logistic hub, etc. So to close up, so Invest Hong Kong, we are willing to help our client to complete the whole customer journey. From the planning stage, you want to know more about Hong Kong or Greater Bay Area, to set up your business in Hong Kong, applying the visa, set up the company, looking for lawyer, etc. Once you launch company, we do the networking. And then when you do the expansion, we have a lot of marketing support and business networking available to provide to our client. So if you have any question, please feel free to reach out to me. Here is my email address and direct phone number. As I mentioned, we do have an office in Sydney, so please feel free to reach out to my colleague in Sydney. Thank you.
Presenting now is Alicia Lykos, the Chief Talent Optimizer and founder of Red Wolf Group. She'll be talking with us today about hiring top talent using science.
As business owners and founders, one of the biggest challenges we all face is building out our teams, getting the right people into the right roles. We've heard it 100 times, but for us, it's really hard because often we're doing it with our gut. We're not quite sure what the role even looks like. Then we go through this really stagnant recruitment process that's a bit archaic because we're going off CVs, bringing them in for an interview, and there's a 50% chance we're going to get it wrong. So the stats really aren't on our side. But what I want to talk to you today is to give you a little bit of data and science behind recruitment and start to think about it differently. We actually don't need to be recruiting like we were back in the 90s, just going off CVs and some simple interviews. We do have access to data, and that's what I want to talk to you today about. One of my clients said to me, before I met you, I felt like I was recruiting blind. I was going into these interviews, asking some questions, and really just hoping for the best. Sometimes people aren't even accurate and real and honest on their CVs, so it's really hard to judge. And especially as business owners and founders, we don't have that experience in recruitment. So often we delegate that out to maybe our HR teams or even the managers, but we haven't really equipped ourselves with the right skills or data to hire top talent into our teams really consistently. We hear an array of things from our clients and people like yourselves. Some of the things we hear our clients say are, they looked so good on paper, but it didn't work out. Or staff can't adapt or keep up with the business. We hire on gut feel and past experiences. We don't know what we need, so it's hard to hire. We don't have clear career paths for people. We fire people mostly due to poor fit in their roles or wrong behaviours. We don't need more ideas, we need execution-focused people. These are just some of the things we hear really consistently when we work in the community. But you're not alone. There is an array of reasons why your hires don't work out. And often it's not your fault. It's that we haven't gone through a really robust recruitment process and we haven't gathered enough data and science along the way to work out if that person really is who they say they are, and also whether they've got the learning and cognitive ability to keep up with the nature of that role that you have. In a survey to 600 executives said that only 49% of their hires last year were good hires. Now that's not great, right? That's about that 50% mark. We really need to be improving on that. Another interesting statistic is of those executives, they said 61% of people were terminated or moved out of the business because they weren't a good behavioral fit or they weren't aligned to the role from a cognitive perspective. They couldn't keep up with the requirements of the role. And again, that's staggering because some of those things we can actually predict using data and science and really increase your odds of getting the right person into the right role. And unfortunately, hiring just got a lot harder for many of the people we work with, and probably yourselves as well. You're interviewing now over video conferencing, over Zoom, and maybe only the very last interview you have them face-to-face. But also sometimes that face-to-face interview never happens because the role might be remote. You know, you may not be hiring inside that actual office. You might be hiring them overseas. And a lot of that interviewing is done via video conferencing and phone. And we lose so much information just from those visual cues of meeting someone face-to-face, in person. What's that interaction? Even some of that banter that we have during a face-to-face interview, it's quite hard and stagnant over video conferencing. So it's even more critical that we have more data up front when we're hiring, so we really understand the drives and motivators of those people, but also their cognitive requirement and their alignment to the job. Is this person really suited from a drives and needs perspective to the nature of the role that you've got in your business? Many of us get caught up in the need to have someone in a job very quickly. Often we don't get a lot of lead time in recruitment, so we have this strong sense of urgency to ring a recruiter or post a job ad. We just need someone in that job. But we haven't actually taken the time to define what we're looking for. We have not designed the job. So what I want you to think about is 3 core elements, and we call this the head, heart, and briefcase. So think of it this way. The briefcase, what are the skills, knowledge, and experience that this person's going to bring with them in their briefcase? Think of it as the things that we're looking for on the resume. So skills, they could be usually hard skills. What do those competencies look like? Then there's the knowledge. Maybe that's, whether they've come from a certain degree or they've got knowledge in a certain topic that you're really looking to bring into the business. And then experiences. What type of experiences have they had in previous roles? Maybe have they traveled? What are you looking for in those experiences for them? And you want to be looking for those in that resume. Then I want you to think about the heart piece. What are the values and the ethics of this role? Because obviously we want every role to be aligned to the business values and ethics. But again, maybe thinking from the perspective of this role as well, and how are we going to identify that in the recruitment process? And finally, the head. And this is actually the piece that most companies don't look at. They're so focused on that resume. Oh, they don't have exactly all the skills, knowledge, and experiences I was looking for. They only had 5 years experience and I wanted 8. Well, I challenge you on that. Start to think about, how is this job going to be operating on a day-to-day basis? And I want you to think about it this way. Is the job highly independent, self-driven, self-motivated, working quite independently? Or is the role quite team operating, collaborative, service-orientated? Then I want you to think about, how extroverted does the role need to be? Is this job highly focused on building relationships, developing connections? Or is it quite introspective, creative problem solving, really thinking through ideas? Or as we move into sort of the patience drive, are they needing to be calm, steady, dealing with repetitive tasks, being quite consistent about things, maybe even implementing process? Or do you want them to be operating at a really fast pace, 100 miles an hour, good at multitasking, again, thinking about where they might be? And finally, as we move into formality, is the job really rule structured, dealing with details, accuracy, precision, being very organized? And again, I challenge you to think about, what is the nature of the job? Or is the job quite flexible? There aren't a lot of rules and structure. It's quite ambiguous. There's a lot of ambiguous situations they might need to adapt to, be spontaneous with. So I'd like you to think about those 4 areas. They're the 4 factors we look at when we build out a job profile. And then I want you to start to think about the brain power required in the job. What's the learning complexity? Is this job constantly changing, evolving, and you need this person to be really, really fast in terms of how they digest information? And is it a highly complex role? Or again, sliding scale, is it more repetitive? And actually they can apply the knowledge they got through their degree and experiences and just use that on the job. And there's not a lot of complexity. So that's what I mean when I think about the brain side of the job. What's that behavioral and cognitive requirement of the job? You're probably thinking, why should I care about the head side of recruitment? Why not just focus on that skills, knowledge, experience, maybe even look at what uni they went to? And I want to give you some really interesting stats when it comes to predicting whether someone will be successful in the role. So we can only predict about 1% of job performance by looking at their school leavers results. So unfortunately, that for those of you who did incredibly well at their school leavers result, whether it's your finishing exams, it's a very small predictor of whether you're going to be successful in a role. Then we move into looking at things like emotional intelligence. They start to increase your capability in the role up to about 10% predictability. But what I want to also show you is something called integrity tests. Integrity tests are something which are excellent to start incorporating into your recruitment process. Think of it like an on-the-job assessment. It could be if you're looking for an accounts payable person, getting them to look at a balance sheet, getting them to do some quick examples. For a developer, we might have them review some code and work out where the bugs are. So it depends what role you're looking at, depends on an integrity test. They usually go for about 20, 30 minutes. Don't overcomplicate it. But again, I really encourage you to put in an integrity test in your recruitment process. They can be quite simple to set up, and they give you a wealth of information of how someone actually might cope on the job. The other thing we obviously need is interviews, and hopefully some structured interviews in your process, and you'll see that's increasing your percentage of getting a good hire. But ultimately, this is not a great overall predictor. The greatest predictor is a combination of having behavioral and cognitive data and structured interviews. This is going to give you about a 58% of accuracy of predicting how successful that person will be in the job. And often people say to me, well, that 60% mark, that's not great, right? But I'd say, well, right now, your chances of success with just doing some interviews and looking at a CV is about 30%. So I would much prefer to bet, in some cases, $100,000 is a new hire's salary and onboarding and training. There's a lot of cost in recruitment. I'd much prefer to bet on that 60% mark, and we can do a few things to go up on that percentage than on just doing an interview, because that's certainly not going to be a great predictor. And think about some of your, bad hires. What process did you put them through? And really challenge yourself to think through your own situations, where you're at, what you've done really well in the past, what's worked well. Could be things like integrity tests or reference checking, or a combination of a lot of things. It is really going to increase your chances of success. But again, it comes down to accumulating as much data as possible when you're looking at a candidate. Earlier, I spoke to you about the brain, the cognitive capability of somebody. Now, why is this important? If you think in today's day and age, we've got a lot of complexity in the work environment. Now, in some roles, they might be hyper complex, which means they're dealing with lots of different situations on a daily basis. Their role is constantly changing. And it is absolutely critical that you've got someone in those type of roles with the brain power to keep up with that role. Think about some of those hires that you've had, and I know I've certainly had them in my career, where it almost didn't matter how many times you went through something with someone, they just couldn't get it. They were asking the same type of questions and they just couldn't keep up with the complexity of the role. Now, that's a brain capacity issue, or what we call cognitive ability. So it's really important you get someone who's aligned to the role, because it's going to really predict their ability to learn, but also handle complex tasks. Have a look at these graphs, because this is a really interesting way to explain it to you. Some roles, there's complexity in the first perhaps 6 months. So there's that steep learning curve to begin with, but you'll see it straightening off. Now, this is a role where, yes, they do have to learn, but then ultimately it doesn't get overly complex long term, and it sort of stabilizes. So they might need to learn some new things, but not at an increasingly challenging pace. So if we have someone's cognitive who can ultimately keep up with that and just learn in that first 6 months, they're going to be fine. But think about a role that absolutely goes up and up and up. Constantly we're requiring this job to take on new challenges, learn new things, deal with complexity. at a constant rate. We absolutely need someone who can stay and increase in their learning complexity as the role picks up in complexity. And this is really, really important because there may have been some people in your business in the past that they learned initially, but they couldn't keep up with that steep climb that they needed consistently throughout the role. But not all roles are created equally. Some jobs don't have a lot of complexity over time. Think about those jobs that are highly repetitive. Again, you might need to learn when you start, but over time, they're really low levels of complexity. Then we move into mid-level complexity, and these might be roles in some instances that are management roles, do have some sort of qualification required, but there is some learning required, but it's not overly complex consistently. And then we have high complexity roles. And these are those roles that are constantly changing. Think of that peak that we looked at before. These roles are constantly changing and evolving, and the environment they're operating in is highly complex. So again, setting a job target that's aligned to the job is really critical. We don't just want really high cognitive scores off people and then put them in low complexity roles. They might get bored over time. Some of you might be thinking to yourselves, well, how do I get that cognitive score off somebody? Now, many of you will be familiar with an IQ type of test, but that type of assessment, if it's done properly, can take hours and hours and hours and sometimes full days to do a full IQ test, and it can be quite exhaustive. And it's going to really gather a huge amount of data and be incredibly accurate. But most companies are not willing to put that type of financial investment or time investment into every candidate. So what we have is a 12-minute assessment that looks at just a few ranges of those elements, so verbal, abstract reasoning, and numerical, to really grasp in a short period of time how fast someone can get through that assessment and how accurately they can do that. Put it this way, if you go to a GP or a doctor, you might have a 10-minute visit. In that time, they'll take your blood pressure, maybe your blood sugars. They'll look at your heart to see how you're going, and they'll do an overall quick exam. And they'll get a pretty good indication of how your overall health is at that point in time by doing some basic measurements. Or you could go and spend a day in a hospital and have MRIs and CTs and ECGs and get a full workup. Now, that obviously is going to be more accurate, but just as much as we can get a snapshot if we go to the GP and do just a small series of tests, we will get a general insight into your health. The same as with this 12-minute cognitive assessment. It's a general cognitive assessment. So it's looking at just giving you that broad insight. Here are some examples of how the results might come out. So you can see here that orange bar, that's really where we've set the job target, sort of right in the middle of the graph you can see. And we've got 3 candidates here, someone at the lower end, someone right around the job, and someone at the high end. So the question then is, who are you going to hire? And a lot of people go, oh, we're going to hire the bottom guy. That sounds like, really great cognitive, absolutely. And I'll say, well, actually, you actually need a lot more data than just this one graph. You need to know what drives and motivates them. We don't know his CV and his background. It's one piece of data. It's incredibly useful for us to have a look at, but we need to gather the rest of the data. So I'm hoping this is a good example to show you of how the results come out. And again, giving you that insight. Actually, if we hire this person at the bottom, they might get bored. But in fact, that might be a great thing for the business because we've got future opportunity, future roles that we might be able to move this person into as they learn this job. We can progress them through to other opportunities for the business. I want to explain to you the 4 quadrants that we operate in. You'll see here on the top right-hand corner, it's this innovation quadrant. People and roles that operate here are all about the vision, the future, big ideas, building relationships, absolutely future-focused, and often in that growing the business through new ideas, new products, and definitely going out and meeting new people. As we move down into this results quadrant, this is really focused on taking those ideas and executing with precision and accuracy, very results orientated, absolutely going and delivering to a certain high standard. As we move around to process, this is looking at things around efficiencies in your business. It could be let's implement process, it could be software, really looking at how we can be consistent in our business. And as we move up into teamwork, these are people and roles that really operate in a teamwork, harmonious, collaborative way. It might be very customer service driven. It could be, in some instances, people that are customer facing from a service perspective. What's interesting is having a think about, well, where do you sit in this wheel? Are you up in that innovation quadrant, results? Are you process or more teamwork, or a combination? Maybe you sit on the border of some of these areas. Then you've really got to look at, well, where are my team? Where does my team sit currently? And then where do I need this role to operate? And that's really sometimes the hard thing to work out. Where does the role sit? Maybe I don't need more of me and my team because we're all quite similar. We might be all up here in innovation agility because we're out, we've founded the business, we're creating new ideas, but now we need to get down into execution or maybe even process. So again, when you're thinking about the type of role, really challenge yourself. Am I going out and finding more people like me? Or am I trying to find something that is actually going to help the team deliver on our strategy? In the tool, we use 17 different type of profile types. Once you start to think about, well, where might this role fit in terms of which quadrants based on where you think the role might be focusing on, I want you to now think about, well, which reference profiles might I be looking for in the role? So up in our innovation and agility quadrant, we have the persuader patterns, the mavericks, the captains, and the venturers. And these are roles that are really focused on thinking about the future, where are we heading, building relationships, very proactive in style, and often quite high verbalizers, really communicating out loud, talking through ideas, operating quite quickly, and usually quite high levels of dominance. So they're very goal orientated. As we move down into our results and discipline quadrant, we start to look for the strategist style profile. We even have the analyzers, the controllers, or the scholars might operate in this quadrant. These profile types are really focused on not only being very goal-orientated and proactive, but they're starting now to think more about rules, structure, some discipline around how they operate, really focusing more on that precision and accuracy, and potentially a little bit more introspective and reserved. They're not going to be those high verbalizers like our mavericks and persuaders. They might be more reflective. Let me think it through. Let me, again, strategize and work out what we need to do and go out and make it happen. As we move over into process and precision, you start to see roles that are the operators, the guardians, the craftsmen. And these roles, you can see they're a little bit more stable. They're calm, they're rule orientated. So again, accuracy and precision, but quite introspective. So really thinking through ideas creatively, more quiet and reserved. And the interesting thing here is they're a little bit more team orientated. So they're not as dominant as they were over on the other side of the wheel. They're thinking about everybody else. How can I help you? Those service style mentality. As we move up into teamwork, we sometimes call this quadrant customer experience or employee experience. They're thinking about everybody else. So they've got a high service drive. They're not as dominant. They're more team orientated, collaborative, harmonious. And also we see them being more extroverted. They're more outgoing. They like verbalizing, and they'll have low drive for a huge amount of rules and structure. So great, again, in service because they're flexible and adaptable. Now, we always have some profiles that don't sit really cleanly in any of these areas. They're more our adapters, our individualists. And actually, some of these profiles don't sit smack bang in those quadrants. They might sit on the border. What we wanted to offer you today is to go and have a look at these 17 reference profiles. If you're thinking about recruitment, you're probably thinking, oh, I think I know which quadrant they might be operating in, but I'm not quite sure what style of profile I'm looking for. Go and download our guide. There's a link below where you can go and visit our website and download this 17 reference profile guide for free. And you can flick through that and start to think about, well, what am I looking for in this job? And who would make a really great fit in that role? So in summary, as we go to assess our candidates, we can start to think about their resume, their skills, their knowledge, their experience. We do want to focus on that briefcase. It is important. And then we move up to the heart, the values and the ethics, and these things can really be brought out in interviews through some powerful interview questions. And last but not least, we've got to assess the brain. What are their behavioral drivers? What drives and motivates them at work? And are they a good fit for that role? And also that cognitive ability that we were talking about earlier. Do they have the brain power that's aligned to the nature of the job? So these are all the things I want you to be thinking about. That head, heart, briefcase, that framework's really powerful as you start to think about the role and the way you're designing it, but also as you start assessing the candidate. Have we ticked off that we've looked at all of those interesting elements? My big reminder to all of you is stop recruiting like you're back in the 90s. We do have data available for you to be recruiting more effectively and using a lot more science around recruitment. We don't have to just be looking at the CV and doing interviews. We can increase our chances of success through using data, through accurate, insightful data that's going to predict workplace behaviors, predict performance, predict the speed they learn. So I would strongly encourage you to think about how you can be recruiting differently this year. We need to evolve. We need to change as we move into the future of work. And that means really looking at how you hire top talent into your business. I hope you've enjoyed.
It's our pleasure to now introduce Flanders Investment and Trade, a facilitator of investment projects in Flanders and supporter to Flemish export companies. As a sponsor of Emergence 2021, today they are represented by Luca Batalo, Director, Catherine van Eckhouten, Head of International Relations at Startups.be, and Sven de Klein, Program Director at imec.istart.
My name is Luca Batalo, Director of the Australian Office of Flanders Investment and Trade. And during this presentation, I will be joined by Catherine from Startups.be, Scaleups.eu, and Sven from IMEC. Flanders is the northern region of Belgium, a gateway to the European market thanks to its location and short distance from major capitals, as you can see from the picture. This is proven by the export and import consolidated data of 638 billions of euro in 2019, and the fact that 30% of the Flemish workforce is dedicated to export. Flanders is the preferred recipient of foreign direct investment, and in 2019, 5.2 billions of euro were invested in Flanders. And this is possible thanks to a quick 4-day business setup process and a broad range of incentives, especially for companies with R&D DNA, as you can see from this slide. Flanders Investment and Trade has a broad network of 96 offices in 72 countries, with our Melbourne office looking after the Australian market. Our offices around the world can support foreign companies in entering the European market or expanding their footprint by assisting them in registering a branch office or a subsidiary in Flanders. We can do this by providing market intelligence, advice, and possibly financial and commercial incentives. For a soft landing in Flanders, you can also count on an efficient cluster ecosystem with partners such as Startups.be and strategic research centers such as IMEC. But now, let me please give the floor to Catherine. Thank you.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. I'm Catherine from the network organization Startups.be. When at the other side of the globe, you think of Europe, metropoles like Paris, London, or Berlin will probably come top of mind. Flanders might still be a hidden gem when it comes to choose where to set foot on the ground with your startup or scale-up. But let me give you 10 reasons why it deserves a serious thought. As you can see, it has a central location exactly in between the 3 biggest markets in the EU, being Germany, France, and the UK. You can reach them within a couple of hours with a dense interconnected transport network. And Flanders hosts many international institutions and lots of corporate decision centers. It is also a very wealthy region with a GDP per capita which is twice the EU average, and almost 80% of the EU buying power is at reach within a circle of 500 miles. It enjoys the best quality of life standards in Europe, alike with household living spaces, which are big, advanced healthcare systems and social services, many good and international schools. Nevertheless, the cost of living is still lower than in the surrounding hotspots, for instance, for real estates and prices and rentals. We are recognized as one of the most globalized places in the world. As said, we host many international organizations, which attracts a very international workforce. Our small sizes forces us to rapidly look over the borders. So we say our startups are born global. Thanks to this global exposure, we have a multilingual population with a very open and welcoming mind. Our workforce has one of the highest productivity levels in the EU, and 35% of the labor force has at least one higher education degree, which is well above the OECD average. So we have an amazing pool of top-class human capital, but let's be honest and recognize that there is still a scarcity in STEM talent, like almost everywhere. And this skill level contributes in its turn to the innovative character of our economy. We have a very intense collaboration between institutes and research institutes and industry. There are excellent universities around that give rise to many spin-offs and incubators, as you will hear in a couple of minutes. And among other verticals, we have a very strong track record in health tech, biotech, fintech, smart logistics, and there are quite some fiscal intense incentives for R&D. This goes together with a strong technology landscape with high-performance digital infrastructure, companies that are top European performance in terms of integration of digital technologies. We are also part of the EU deep tech champions. So setting up a business is just a matter of days, and there is an increasing presence of funding since a couple of years. We're also considered as the playground of Europe, which is always interesting to test the market. So as you can see, there is a rapidly growing and maturing startup ecosystem in Flanders with a high number of supporting facilities from co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators, maker spaces, inventors, etc. So the organization that I represent has a major role in federating all these ecosystem players for innovation and co-creation. So I would say subscribe to our newsletter, as we organize a number of events that you can now attend remotely, thanks to COVID, and that will allow you to get to know our vibrant community. So let me now hand it over to Sven de Klee.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, my name is Sven de Klee. I'm the Program Director of IMEC iStart. IMEC actually is a big research institute, and as a matter of fact, is the largest independent research institute on nanotechnologies and digital technologies globally. Established back in 1984, IMEC collaborates with a lot of academic and industrial partners to develop new innovations in these nanotech and digital fields. Headquartered in Leuven, IMEC also has operations elsewhere on the globe, both in Europe, mainly in the Netherlands, to the west in the US, as well as in different locations in Asia, like Taiwan, India, and China. IMEC has a workforce of 4,500 highly skilled technologists in those nanotech and digital technologies. And IMEC has its main purpose to collaborate with large and small companies to develop new innovations in these nanotech and digital fields. As part of IMEC's activities, we have developed an accelerator program called IMEC iStart. The main purpose of IMEC iStart is to help companies make the transition from an initial rough idea proof of concept towards building a sustainable business that has all chances and likelihood to become a real scale-up and beyond afterwards. The program itself has a 12 to 18-month duration and focuses on 3 key milestones to be achieved by the end of the program, being market readiness, growth readiness, and investor readiness. And it also includes a pre-seed investment. Over the years, IMEC iStart has supported over 225 startups, of which more than a quarter has turned into real global scale-ups already, which attracted over 315 million euros of follow-up financing. And currently, still 85% of the startups and spin-offs we supported are still active and survive. As part of our activities, we also have developed a partnership, which is called the Global Markets Accelerator Program, together with some partners in Asia, as well as the key partner being La Trobe University and its accelerator. Through the program, we provide Australian startups access to international markets, and in our case, of course, access to Europe through Flanders as a good test region. As we speak, our program is ongoing, and in the first stage, where we explored the feasibility, we selected 6 Australian companies, of which now 2 are in a deep dive 6-month acceleration program to really enter the European market. This collaboration is, of course, supported by our know-how, and IMEC iStart is proudly benchmarked as the #1 university-linked business accelerator in Europe. We'd be more than happy to talk to all the participants of Emergence 21 and share our insights on how to set up and accelerate your business in Europe. Thank you very much.
Presenting now is Jason Atkins, co-founder and CEO of Cake Equity. Jason will be discussing how we can speed up our raise with best practice investor management information from cap table to term sheets and investor relationship building.
Hi everyone, this is Jason from Cake, and today we're going to talk about how to speed up your round. So you can literally get your round done in half the time, and in the interest of that, I'm going to get straight into it. So Cake and Chris, really help use technology as much as you can with your raise, with your cap table, get everything, done as seamlessly and streamlined as you can. We are raising in reasonably tough conditions. There's definitely money out there, absolutely, but unfortunately, it's just a bit tougher than normal. So just work harder, cast a wider net, follow up harder. Make sure your deal is COVID-proof. Make sure your story is, future-proof. All these things so that you're the best deal you can be and you can beat out that next deal. Okay, so we're going to go through getting ready, marketing, and closing. So in getting ready, you want to measure twice and cut once. It's really important. You don't want to get into the middle of your raise and realize that you've made a whole bunch of mistakes preparing, because you'll slow down your deal and you'll actually lose investors. Every investor you lose is another 10 investors you need to talk to, to get back to that one that wants to invest. So prepare properly. Now raises can take months. Anyone who's done one knows that. They normally take anywhere from sort of 3 to 6 months. But the more you need to do as much as you can to shorten that as much as you can. So preparation is key, as I said, and can save you months in time. Most important thing in any raise, in my opinion, and I've spoken to lots of people from investors and founders, is where are you going? Why are you and why is this company the company that these investors need to back? So focus on that a lot in your pitch. Focus on that a lot in your follow-up. It's going to really help you. Here's some evidence from the market. This is Blackbird and Airtree, 2 of the top investors. You can see it's about the game changers and the wild hearts. So it's about you and your mission and your company and why should they be involved. Don't forget a little FOMO. Make sure you've got that energy in your raise all the time. It's a big driver for getting your raise closed. So here we're going into what you should pitch. Again, I'm focusing on that same sort of theme. You can see there the team. So you, very important. The problem solution, very important. What's the deal? Make sure you got the deal clear. And what are you going to do with the money? So really early rounds, that's critical. With investor readiness, a little bit more information. So do your market research. Make sure you know investors invest in your industry, in your niche, at your stage. You don't want to be wasting time talking to people that are in the wrong space from you, because they're not going to invest. Make sure you're talking to investors that invest as well. Don't just spend heaps of time talking to people if they haven't done an investment in the last year, because it's really difficult for you to get funding in that circumstance. Make sure you use a startup accountant and a lawyer. Don't work with professional services providers that aren't focused in your niche, in growth companies that understand your deal and what's going on. They're going to slow you down. They're going to give you the wrong deals. They're going to slow down your discussions with investors, and they're going to give you the wrong advice and slow down your raise. That can cost you weeks and even months and even kill your deal, that sort of stuff. So yeah, get expert, respected help. The Wholesale Investor and Chris teams are great. There's lots of advisors out there that have done all this stuff before. Ask as many questions as you can. make sure you're not just like, there's an investor market out there. You know, your company needs to look a certain way. It needs to have a certain val. It needs to have particular terms in the term sheet. There's all these things that you need to do to make your raise go well. And if you don't do those things, it literally delays your raise by weeks or months. So make sure you get help. They're going to know the rules of your company. So how does your constitution work? How does your current shareholders agreement work? Have you got an ESOP? Is there waivers that you need to get done? You need to know that stuff before you run your raise. If you don't, it's just going to slow you down. You can get all the way to the last minute when you've got an investor right there, and then you realize in due diligence that there's all these technical things that you haven't done. It can delay your raise by months and even kill it. So get that stuff done up front. Kate's really good at that stuff, but you know, obviously there's other people that can help you with that too. Use standardized agreements as much as possible. Like, look at the Airtree open source term sheet. You know, ask around what's the right documentation that you should be using. So it just makes investors' life so much easier when they go to sign. Again, know what the market terms are. So, you know, what valuations are going in your industry and for your stage, and what other terms that people are getting. Are people using a convertible note, or are they using equity to raise at your stage? You need to know those things so that when you're actually raising, you don't get blocked along the way. Make sure you get a data room prepared, depending on your stage, how much you're raising, how professional investors are that are coming in. Whatever, you need a data room of some kind. You need it done in advance. You don't want to get stuck in the middle of your raise realizing you haven't prepared some core piece of information, because let me tell you, these things are all technical. And if you've got to do them in the middle of your raise, they're really going to slow you down. So understand how your cap table works. The top two things in due diligence for investors is what's going on in the cap table and what's going on with the modeling. So what's the deal terms? What's the dilution? Are there any con notes? Are there any employee options? You know, do they need a share split? Is ASIC up to date? All these things are critical for closing your round. And if you don't do them at the beginning, before you start raising, then you're just going to have to deal with them later. It can cost you weeks, months, tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. It's like really bad form. Not to criticize, only to help you speed up your round a lot. So the marketing, we see I'm going for time, not too bad. So with the marketing, have a big enough list. So, you know, obviously you guys are in the wholesale investor community. They're wonderful for that. They've got one of the best, you know, markets in the country. But make sure you've got enough investors that you're talking to. You know, if you're raising $1 million and you think your average check size is going to be 100,000, you need at least 10 investors, but not all the people you talk to are going to invest. So you can back solve how many relationships you need to have, you know, to be able to get your funding. Really smart way of thinking. Build relationships before and during. You know, you can't expect people to invest when they first meet you. You need to understand that, you know, investors require a relationship in most circumstances to be able to invest. Know who to work with, when and how. So just have the right advisors on your side. Make sure you're getting the right help along the way. You do need to create a sense of urgency. So you need to you need to know that you've got enough investors to be able to get your round done. And you need to work hard and with respect and build relationships and have a closing date, and really make sure that there's a process around that to make sure that there's tension and people need to make a decision so the investors are, you know, happy to, you know, proceed and you can get your round closed. And follow up properly. You know, so many people will just get an email address and they'll send an email and they won't get a reply and then they'll just give up. You can't do that. You need to email, you need to email, you need to email, you need to get that call done, and then you need to follow up. Not in a disrespectful way, but you really need to follow up properly because, you know, so many investments are wasted based on just poor execution. I've definitely seen that. All right, and now to closing. So it can take weeks from when you think you've got your deal done to when the money's in the bank. It can take longer, and you can really speed that up. So automate it as much as you can. Oh, misspelled crisp. Sorry, guys. Crisp, cake, things like that. Automate, use software as much as you can. Create a sense of urgency. Make sure you're following up well. There's a strong concept in Australia of a lead investor. I think this works really well within the wholesale community as well. So you need lead investors, you need momentum, and then you need to really follow up after that. It's really critical for getting your round done. And look, avoid signing blockages. So make sure you've got some good software or good lawyers, and the signing process is really nice and tight, because that can also delay your raise as well. Now, each one of these things on its own, around your raise won't kill the timing of the raise, but there's so many things you need to do. And unfortunately, what happens is there's a week delay here and a 3-week delay here and a 2-week delay there and a 4-week delay there. And then your raise is like 6, 8, 12 months long. We need to remove all these little delays via preparation mainly, and good support and good systems. And then your raise can be, 2 months long. And, think about how much more your company can get done if your raise is 2 months instead of 8 months. Just a little bit on the terms. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but if you're doing an equity round, you need to know about liquidation preferences and anti-dilution and founder vesting and all these things. Really important that you're not learning these in the middle of your raise. One, it can slow you down a lot trying to understand them while you're negotiating, which obviously puts all the power with the investor. I'm not trying to hustle investors here either, by the way. I'm just trying to create a fair situation. But you need to know this stuff in advance. So before you get into your raise, get your shareholders agreement out, understand all these things. If you haven't got a shareholders agreement, understand you're probably going to have one when you get your term sheet. So again, understand all these things, understand how they work in practice, how they work legally. If you make mistakes in this area, it can cost you millions in the long run. It can cost you control of your company. There's lots of downsides if you get these things wrong. But you need to be aware of them, because you pretty much can't get a good deal done without these things. So just best to get into it as soon as possible. So I've got a lot of resources here. We've got a blog. There's evaluation software there. There's heaps of great documents on the Airtree website. There's some capital raising treasure in there, but I think most of this stuff you get sorted out by a wholesale investor anyway. So that's it from me. There's a bunch of tips in there to shorten up your raise by half, which any founder, any executive, really should be working on, because the time you spend on raising could be spent on growing a company and with your customers and with your team. And, I know, what I'd rather be doing. So, look, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for checking in, and good luck with your raise.
Next to speak is Steve Torso, Managing Director and co-founder of Wholesale Investor and Crisp. Today, Steve will be talking about building your capital raising brand.
Thank you for the introduction, and obviously really happy and excited to be a part of the Venture Business Summit, because for me, what this has been so important for us is we did this first last year at this time. It was actually around about April, where there was just so much uncertainty in the actual ecosystem. We thought we want to provide content, we want to provide pathways forward for people to allow to sort of achieve some of the key areas, whether it be trying to raise capital or just get access to any type of capital, whether it be grant funding, debt, or obviously raising equity capital as well, and what sort of terms they could be on and so forth. Likewise, we want to help companies with the hiring process if they were going to be going to growth mode, etc. And just all the other typical issues that come around for us as founders. And now this tradition is going to continue. And for me, the topic I'm going to be talking about today is really how to build your capital raising brand. And the reason why this is such an important topic is because it's really about how to get the attention of investors, strategic partners, whatever it may be, in a space of seconds. I've realized, for me, this content's been built over years of sort of observing the promotion of companies, going through the experience myself, and just consistently trying to refine the way in which we actually communicate about our clients to potential investors. And also as a personal way, me trying to understand the best way for me to communicate my own business to investors as well. So, I hope this really sort of makes a difference in how you actually think about the presentation of your business, because this is really about the capturing of attention part. This whole ecosystem is driven by people that are borderline ADHD, myself included. And, we've got so many things that are trying to get our attention. So how do you get that attention? Well, here's some of the key areas that we sort of focus on. So as a first step, our role as a founder is to help our business go from unknown to known, and then obviously to success. And part of that is we've got to obviously manufacture our visibility. And for me, that's been the key important part that I've seen of why companies utilize us, but also what I've been doing for myself, whether it be in Australia, whether it be in Singapore, whether it be now sort of in the UK, Canada, US, etc. So you do everything to try and manufacture that visibility, because you know that one of the right contacts can change the entire trajectory of your business. The challenge for us as founders, we're always trying to find that one contact, and we have to try all sorts of different things to do it, and we can fail 99 times, but that one right person, you know, from that one meeting that we weren't ever expecting, or whatever it may be, or that introduction that comes 6 months after we tried something, that's what can make all the difference to our business. And so we're always striving for that. So these are the core principles for us, is how do we go from that unknown to known and really manufacture that visibility, and then likewise leading on manufacture serendipity. So if you think about the 3 stages of process to any buying decision, is to basically, first stage is awareness, second stage is consideration, and then the third stage is actually the decision part. Now, the area that I really want to focus on for this discussion is really around the awareness part, because that's what we're talking about today. And when you think about that component, you know, I always like to highlight people that we often have a challenge that we don't know, right? And that is, if you look at the beautiful example of Blockbuster and Netflix, is Blockbuster were the kings when it came to videos, right? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, said Netflix started to chip away at them. But what did they do? They made the experience to get access to content like that very, very efficiently for any users, or any users for their software or for their product, right? And that's really the story about it. So from the lesson of, you know, taxis to Uber or Blockbuster to Netflix, we learned that if we don't make the process streamlined for investors or targeted to our investors, then we unfortunately have the opportunity to lose the investor. And why is that? Because we're competing. You know, as founders, we're competing for every other thing that an investor can put money into. You know, whether it be the listed public markets where, you know, it's been common for companies to go 3x, 5x, 10x, etc. That used to be the returns that investors are looking for in the private space. Now it's been achieved in the public space. So we're fighting for that same capital from investors, right? So it's like, how do you stand out in the crowd? How do you make yourself know? Like, what is the difference that you can bring to the table for a potential investor that's looking to invest into your business? And that's what we're always wrestling for. And this is really part of that awareness stage for investors. So to really do that, it's important to understand what investors are looking for when they first try and look at a business. Now, of course, they're looking for all sorts of different things in an investment opportunity. But what I'm trying to tap into is in that first 5 to 10 seconds that someone is skimming an opportunity or trying to understand whether they should give an opportunity and any additional time, what are they actually looking at? So first things they're looking at is the company actually in a growing sector? That's such a logical one, but really, as I've seen over the last few years, when a sector goes on fire, right, all of a sudden you start to see investors focusing more on that. And it's the beautiful saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. You know, one of our clients that I've just seen recently, they've now achieved a 400% growth since IPOing, was Banksa. You know, now they're a fiat to crypto platform. Now, during the crypto winter, they had to work incredibly hard to get the attention of investors because it was out of favor at that time. Now they've got everyone chasing them. Another beautiful example I've seen of this is a company called Beforepay, which is one of the hottest IPO prospects for this year. Now, they went from startup to basically raising, I think, $13 plus million in the space of a 12-month period. And their traction just went through the roof. Now, they were initially called Check. Now, when they were called Check, they got little attention compared to when they changed their name to Beforepay. And it's such a simple marketing thing, but that change of name to Beforepay, all of a sudden their media visibility cranked up, the awareness cranked up, and everyone seemed to know about Beforepay, but no one seems to remember Check. The power of brand is such an important thing for all of us, and sometimes we forget it because we're so focused on building our business and so focused on building our product, right? So growing sector, when your time is on and the spotlight is on your sector, you need to do everything possible to capture as much of that attention as possible, right? So really key important, growing sector. Board and management, the ability to show, been there, done that, execution experience is really important. So Typically, we encourage companies to highlight any successful exits or any senior positions that their team members or that their board of management have previously had, right? Because then what that shows to a potential investor is the CEO or the founder is surrounded by people that know how to execute and is guiding that founder on the execution path. Shareholders and skin in the game is always an important signal for investors, because the reason why shareholders is important, because often they'll look at a company and they'll think, okay, well, who else is invested into this business, right? Or who else is invested into this round? That's a signal. And if you want to put it down to the simplest form, investors are looking for two types of signals. They're looking for trust and confidence indicators, right? So what that means for them, if other shareholders have already invested into that business, that provides a level of confidence, especially if they're relevant to the sector, relevant to the area, or maybe even quite well known in that industry. So when you're communicating your business to investors, everyone wants to talk about what they're doing, their product, and so forth. In the investor's mind, you've got to understand that we as humans, we are deletion creatures. We are deleting so many things that are happening around us at all times that, we're basically, how can I put it, that we're just looking for the things to capture our attention in that moment. And the easiest example is when you buy a new car and then all of a sudden you start seeing that new car everywhere, right? And it's just simply because our brains delete what we're not looking for, but then all of a sudden it starts to recognize everything that we are looking for. And this is the language of communication to investors, right? So, existing shareholders is one of those languages that's really important to an investor. So if you have them already on your register, then fantastic, communicate that. If not, then you need to highlight what your skin in the game is, because one of the Jason Calacanis in my interview, he highlighted that one of the biggest challenges that for investors is sometimes founders just quit on the business. Right, so it's important for potential investors when you're at the early stage to understand what your skin in the game is and what you have on the line for the business. Government industry awards are always a key part, and the reason being that simply it's some sort of validation for that you are working on something technological and something that has to do with some sort of breakthrough, something that's innovative, right? So the industry awards part for me is that if an industry can actually recognize what someone is doing, that is also a trust and confidence signal from the actual industry itself. So typically the more technical businesses, I think it's really important that they do highlight that. I know in life science, this often focuses around data, right? And that's also important. For me, so whether it be government grants, whether it be industry awards, or whether it be relevant data, if you're sort of in the life science area, they're the typical things that investors are looking for. Okay, well, what other recognition or what other notification is these companies getting outside of all the things that they're talking about what they do? Brand name clients is a big one, right? And the simple fact of that is that if you've got a brand name client, right, or a blue chip client using your product or service, what that means for the investor is that you've gone through a procurement process, and typically they expect it to go for a couple months, and you passed. That's really important. So what that says is it's basically it's product validation for an investor, also highlighting the potential, to sell that to other sort of blue chip companies as well is also important. And there can obviously be metrics around that as well. Now, for B2B businesses, then metrics is really important. So in the case of Beforepay, they had incredible growth metrics that were very easy to communicate to investors as far as how much interest there was in their product. I can't remember if one stage was like 20% or 10% week on week growth that they were actually experiencing, but they went from startup to like 100,000 plus users in a very, very short period of time. So, obviously you don't need to achieve that, just to be clear, but if you can communicate any type of metrics which are relevant to investors, that then gives them some sort of indicator as far as the product validation that you've been experiencing. So hope that helps you understand what investors are looking for. And I said, the idea behind this is how do you capture someone's attention within 5 to 10 seconds? And that doesn't mean they're going to hand over money for that. It's more about basically, that's interesting, I want to find out more. That's effectively what you're trying to achieve. Now, one of the key areas we've been communicating more and more to companies is around the area of the elevator pitch. You know, it's so interesting how hard we'll work on our pitch decks, so hard how we'll work on the presentation, shareholder community, all that sort of stuff. But actually, people spend very little time on absolutely nailing their elevator pitch. And the funniest thing is this is your first port of call with someone. This is where when you actually get face to face with someone, this is your ability to communicate, you know, within seconds who you are and what's the problem and then what is the solution. So to me, this is a really simple way for you to think about how to go about it. So do you know how what we do is? As I said, make it brief, highlight the benefit, make it very specific. You know, I'll give you the example of, I did an interview for our How I Raised session with Ray from Essential Queensland. And, you know, I went through the example of how Ray was frustrated. He was getting, you know, he'd been to a few different countries with us and he was just struggling to raise that money. And there's a car just taking off in the background. And he was struggling to raise money. And then what we did was we refined his opening line, because when I asked him, when I said to explain what you do, it was a 15-minute conversation. Now, I'm super polite, but an investor doesn't need to be super polite to him. So they can switch off after 30 seconds and move on mentally in the conversation. Now, when I asked him what he did, even in that video, he had that down to one line, right? And my actual comment to him is just say this one line until the day that you sell your business. And interestingly enough, he ended up selling his business to an ASX-listed company during COVID. So said there's a massive power in an elevator pitch in getting it right, because all it's designed to do is to basically leave that door that little bit open so that you can walk through it for more opportunities for conversation, right? So really spend that time on nailing your elevator pitch. Now, some of the other things we like to talk about is this unknown to known aspect, right? So these are some of the key areas, as I said, and how you actually build your capital raising brand. As I mentioned, your board and team are important parts. So if you can put out publicly or put down who they are, that's interesting for it. Said whether it be board and team, that's interesting. The existing shareholders, any awards you won, grants you've received, the sector that you're in, and then any relevant metrics, they are the key things that investors are looking for on a first stop basis, right? So it is taken me years to identify this as key areas, right? So my hope in communicating this to you is that you can overlay this to your business and actually spend the time. If it takes you 2 hours to get this exact, and I said, what you need to do is you need to summarize it down to bullet points, right? So each one should have its own points. Even if you have 3, 4 of them, it doesn't matter, right? It just allows you to communicate what you have in a way that an investor understands really simply. Okay, now the next part. This one's an important one because I know I've made this mistake when speaking with investors in that I try and sometimes I've tried to communicate too much. You know, on that particular day, I was just super focused on the product on some of the product things or some of the customer success parts we were trying to do. And then when I caught up with the investor, I started outlining all this, right? And the truth was I had this embarrassing situation where when I got to the end of a lunch with a potential investor, and he actually pulled me up on it and just said, I didn't really want to hear any of that. He goes, all I want to understand is where you're going, right? So to summarize it, they want to see what the end result looks like, right? And just really, and then obviously everything else can be worked back as far as how you get there. But I said, when I was trying to detail all those parts in that high level, what was meant to be a high level discussion, I said it really deterred from it. Now, if investors start asking for all those different things, that's another point in general. But in this case, this was meant to be a high-level discussion about the future of the company and the direction and so forth. And I was spending time talking about things which they actually didn't want to know about. So really important to be clear in communicating what the investor actually wants to see. Now, some other things to really highlight that just so you know when you're actually going to speak with investors is that the first step in the investor's psychological process is they want to avoid loss, right? It's a natural human nature. In everything we do, we don't want to make mistakes. We want to avoid loss. So it's important to understand that some of the ways which an investor thinks about losing is, one is related to money, obviously. The second one is time. The third one is reputation, if it's featured publicly anywhere. And then the fourth one is opportunity cost, right? So if they're investing money into you, if they're investing 50K, 100K, a million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, whatever it is, what else could they have invested that money into that could have provided a better return? So that's effectively what you've got to think about, is that those key areas when you're actually having conversation with investors, but just know it, right? And said they've got this in their minds, you know, sort of ingrained in how they think about it. Then the next part is in the investor psychology is they don't want to be the first one in, but they also don't want to miss out, right? So sometimes one of the biggest challenges companies have is wrangling the first investors to come across the line, right? If you get the first investors across the line, it's actually a massive step in the capital raising process. Getting those first investors across the line is a whole nother challenge. So understand the stages that investors going through is, firstly, they'll typically want to understand who else has gone into the round, right? So they don't want to be the first one in, but also don't want to miss out. And then if they know different groups that have already, or different private high net worths that have already gone into your round, then you kick into the bandwagon effect where they will actually start to follow, right? And that typically happens. And you see that with high net worths, you see that with VCs, you see it with, you know, many different groups. It's common because it means someone else has typically done the work and decided to invest, and they think to themselves logically, well, I don't want to miss out on this opportunity that this other person has now got access to. So now the next part is FOMO. So when a capital raise gets to the stage that it's 70, 80%, then it gets into the mode of fear of missing out. And that's typically what you need to communicate when you're going through the phase. So as I said this, and I'm still talking about the awareness phase here, right? You need to know where you are in your own capital raise to know what the psychology of the investor is. But if you're having a first chat with an investor, right, and you're coming towards the end of your capital raise, you need to communicate where you are, because I said basically a lot of the fears that they have are gone as far as other people have already gone into the raise. They may be of some sort of profile that's relevant to them and are willing to have done the work, and then they'll be typically thinking to themselves, well, I don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Typically, you see this with IPOs, especially of late when IPOs are sort of going 5-6 times oversubscribed, right? So, and then their investors are typically worried about scale backs for those raises. Other important things to know, at a high level, investors are looking for a 5x to 10x return at a minimum. VCs are often looking for returns which can actually replace the capital that they're for their entire fund, right? So that's why they're looking to make big bets on companies, where most private high net worth are at least minimum sinking, or sort of later stage funds are looking for that sort of 5x to 10x return, or they're looking for short-term uplift or even yield, of course, with some relevant opportunities that are providing yield. And then the last one is exit. Now, some VCs are looking for the company to not exit in the near term where other investors are. So if you understand where the investor sits on that table, it's important to communicate, that for them, right? But really the lessons for me is that what I want people to have is when they're going through a capital raise is I just want you to have an additional amount of confidence, right? There's nothing like having that confidence that you can communicate your story in a way which is relevant, which is succinct, which is brief, which is in the language that the investors in the private space are seeking to understand, or generally how the capital markets are looking to understand. That's my session on building a capital raise brand. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. My name is Steve Torso. I'm the founder and managing director of Wholesale Investor. I hope you enjoyed this session and enjoy the rest of the Venture Business Summit.
Presenting now is Dan Burakan, Managing Partner at Fastlane Solutions. Dan will be discussing the 11 key factors for a successful startup strategy.
I'm Dan Burakan of Fastlane Solutions, and I'm talking today about the magic formula of a successful startup strategy. And there are 11 beans in my magic formula. Number one, straight away into it. Number one is a track record in sales of your product or service business. It has to be verified. It has to show that your business withstood the trial of time. Number two is the global potential. The investors are looking for the growth and the potential, not for the current EBITDA or even profitability of your business. It is actually calculated IRR that investors will be calculating for themselves, and it's better if you can help them with these calculations. Now, this has to be done based on a solid foundation of an existing solution. To some extent, of course, it can be MVP again. This is number 3. Number 4 is the character and personality of CEO or the founder or the founding team. This is absolutely important and adamant from investors' perspective. Now, it is really important to show to yourself or to the investors that you have a proven problem-solving skills. The business is all about change and problems. Things changing every day. Nothing can be actually planned 100%. Show them how you actually done it in the past. Give examples of problems that you solved, how you approach that. Have a good diary of your problem-solving situations. Now we are getting to the moat questions. Moat is something that actually safeguards your business from others. And one of the elements of the moat is the number 6 in my formula, is called deep expertise. Your business has to expertise and focus on something very special that will be hard for others to achieve or do. Deep expertise. Now, talking about moat, it is really good if your business is dealing with something that is really hard for others to enter in some industry aspect or IP or anything else. Hard entry points, something that you possibly have spent years learning, doing, and excelling in. And now this is your value add. Now, talking about global win and potential, one of the things that investors are interested, and certainly successful startups would be also good at, is getting into new segments, new markets, new geographies. Call it new market segments. That's number 8 in my formula. Now, talking about the investors, if you are looking to bring investment on board as a part of your successful startup strategy, it is certainly not the last thing that investors are thinking about is the check size. It is how much money they are asked for, how much money you are asking them to bring, and what they're gonna get in return. This is number 9. Number 10 is extra value add services, complementary value of your business to the business in the portfolio. Whether it is a professional investment manager or someone with portfolio companies, especially if it is the latter, they will be looking for that complementary value add services that your business can bring to you. And you might be asking yourself why this is important for your successful startup strategy. Well, it is absolutely important. Whether this investor might be opening doors for you, might become your channel, or might actually safeguard your independence in the future. You want to bring them these value add points or unique sales points of your business as complementary value to what they have. And of course, the last but not the least is the exit strategy, thought through from the beginning for the investor or for yourself. So you define your success criteria from the beginning. You set this as a target, as a star, and you work hard to achieve that. It was Dan Borikin talking about 11 magic beans for a successful startup strategy as a part of Founder Workshop. Thank you very much for listening.
Presenting now is John Dean, co-founder of Sales Director Central. JD will be discussing startup to scale up, accelerating revenue growth.
Hi, thank you first of all to Wholesale Investor for this opportunity of presenting today. My name is JD from Sales Director Central. What I want to do in this presentation is share some of the findings that we see in the marketplace with startups that get into scale up. So we work with founders and invariably technology companies that are between $1 and $20 million. And it's important for the one because if you can sell it, we can scale it. We come in and we have a process we have called PAMIS, which enables an organisation to create a framework for sales. So why do we do this? Our purpose is that we want to change the way the world views sales. So we want to make the world a better place. And our mission is to help founders sleep at night by realising their revenue dreams. The reason we came up with these two things, particularly the founders, is that what we saw with a couple of founders was they weren't actually sleeping at night. They were super concerned and worried about revenue. And so it kind of seemed to make sense. So our mission and purpose is to change the world and help founders sleep at night. What I want to get done over the next 29 minutes is really stimulate some of your thinking around how you go about selling currently, give you some actionable ideas and tips of things you could be doing differently. But I really want to make sure that what we're doing is completely customer centric. We spend a lot of time working with founders, much like you, and what we see is a really recurring variety of things consistently. So the first thing we do when we get engaged with a client, we come and do a blueprint. And a blueprint is where we're looking at the organisation kind of from start to finish of an engagement with a customer, how you write your proposals, presentations, etc. And then we come back and make a series of recommendations and provide some insights. From those blueprints, we see a really consistent series of things that we then have some of our team, some of our mentors going and implementing. We're going to look at product versus problem. Most organizations have a very product-centric website, and we're going to talk to that. Then we're looking at risk versus price, some research in the marketplace. We're going to look at the things that we really often see and what you can do about them. We're going to talk super briefly about our mousetrap, which is called PAMIS, the thing that we sell. And then there's a giveaway at the end. So if you want to get some more of our time, you can engage us and we can have a 30-minute conversation with you around that. So the product versus problem is a really interesting paradigm shift for a lot of our clients. If you think about your website right now, 90% of the websites we see are very product-centric. Here is the feature function capability. Here are the things that we do. Here's our price list. Here are the customers that maybe we serve. They're very product-centric and they're very, very much making sure that someone who's come to the website understands where they're at and that they need this functionality and problem and capability. What we want to do is shift your focus is what is the problem you solve? Are you really clear on what that problem is? And how do you talk to that problem? What is the insider's view from your knowledge of the marketplace? And we can then start asking questions, which we do in prospect meetings like, do you have these problems, issues, concerns? We see this all the time. And even just making that statement, we see this all the time, certainly gives our prospects some comfort and confidence that we know what we're talking about. The next line we typically use is the reason is, and I'm going to share some of these with you in a moment, but what problem do you really solve? What are the 2 or 3 problems that every one of your customers have that you can then address? And how do you make sure the website reflects and looks like that? We recently had a prospect who came to our website and he gave me some really interesting feedback when he replied to an email we'd sent saying, when I looked at your website, it really resonated with me. We weren't talking about the things that we sell. We talked about the problem that he has and some of the issues and concerns he might have around that. So let me share some of these with you as we get into the presentation. So as a founder, one of the things that we talk to, have you hired and fired a salesperson? It's a really key point for us. If an organisation hasn't hired and fired, our chances of winning that organisation drop. If they have hired and fired, then they know that it is a very costly exercise, and typically they're not sure exactly how to deal with that the next time. If they have hired and fired 2 to 3, we've heard up to 5 or 6 people. It's a very costly exercise. So what we say to organisations that have done that is there's 3 reasons why that's happened. Again, we see this all the time. You look in the wrong place for the wrong behaviour and then you leave them. So let me explain what I mean by that. You look in the wrong place, you look on any job board, you advertise for a salesperson, and as we talked about before with frameworks, anyone in sales is probably someone that doesn't really relate to you. You're more probably a technical person, a consultant, someone understands more about the problem that we're solving. So any salesperson will do, right? Wrong. They're looking for the wrong behaviour. So look on any job board. What we want to be doing is get someone who's got experience selling and have them come and join your organisation, because that person's got a better chance of success. Wrong behaviour, what does that mean? The behaviour that we're looking for in a salesperson is not the talker, the blagger, the person who can speak underwater. It's a person that I'm going to say is business curious. So they're really intrigued about an organisation, the problems they have, who has the problems, how do they want to solve them. They have a general curiosity around those things, and that helps them uncover a whole bunch of information about the customer and why they're going to make a buying decision. And then the last problem with that is they leave them. They leave them to fail. You hire a salesperson, and at some point, you go to them in the 3-month or 6-month mark and say, where is the pipeline? Where are the deals? It hasn't worked. And then you rinse, repeat, you do that again. So that's the base problem and issue that we solve with a lot of organisations. If you've hired and fired, as I said, high chance that you fit our market really well. Next one is you've hired a PR firm and you think that increasing leads is all you need to do to start selling your product. And it's very much a build it, they will come. You've built it and they haven't come. Marketing or PR tend to work, certainly PR, on good case studies of examples of things you've done really well. And just by throwing the name out and saying, hey, we have this great technology, it actually doesn't solve it for most people. Sales is a dirty word. Pipeline isn't trusted, and deals slip every month. Now, do deals slip every month for lots of different organisations? Absolutely. But when you're a smaller company, and getting that deal across the line is really vital to your existence, then having deals slip constantly, which tends to be most of our clients, they tend to go on what we call gut feel or he said, she said. So when we look at sales meetings, the 2 or 3 people, they tend to say, this is what I did last, and this is what I'm going to do next. What it doesn't do is it doesn't promote a deal properly enough in your process. It doesn't allow us to understand enough about the customer and then, as we said, promote the deal moving forward. This is a big one for a lot of founders. Every founder is time poor, ridiculously time poor. You've got distractions with every other part of the business, and sales is either something you put little time and effort into or almost no time and effort into because you're trying to manage every other part of the business. Customer is unhappy. Someone hasn't turned up today, paying bills, all those things that come into play. So again, a lot of things we see with all our clients is super time poor. Because of lack of revenue, they're chasing any deal that's non-core. And so what they do is they start to getting away from the reason they actually made this product in the first place and getting into an environment where they're just trying to get any revenue, and they try and make the product fit any particular process rather than understand exactly go back to the tours of this is why we did it, and these are the things that we're going to start to do. And then it's a really big one, trying to be the smartest person in the room. They try and be we have this product that no one's seen before, or that we have, we look at this differently the way everyone else has. And the problem with being the smartest person in the room is it extends sales cycles. And I'm going to show you that on a graph in a moment. So they do too many demonstrations over and over and over because they've not only tried to be the smartest person, but they've got what I call a victim mentality. We need to prove ourselves all the time rather than say to someone, we understand your business problem. We understand how much that problem is costing you right now. And we also understand what you need to do in order to make a buying decision. That puts us in a lot better position than doing 10 presentations potentially to people who just may not buy at any stage. So this is a graph. I've showed this graph quite a lot. I really like what it starts talking to. There's on the y-axis is level of buyer's concern. So at the top of that axis, the buyer is really concerned. Down the bottom of that axis, the buyer's not concerned. There's a timeline with 3 time segments in it. In the first time segment, we're in solution development mode. That's when the customer's really worried about their solution and the requirements that they have. And we tend to send our people out. Salespeople go and visit them, maybe even pre-sales people. We send people to understand a little bit about what they do and help them with their solution development. In the middle slice, we're evaluating. So the customer is doing their evaluation and we look at our product, our service, our offering, our capability. So they're evaluating the software and we show them fundamentally the things that we have. And in the last time slice, customers looking to make a commitment and they look at our company. How long have you been around? What is the product roadmap? What does the longevity of this relationship look like? So with those 3 time slices, I'm then going to map 4 components. And I guess what I want you to really get out of this is where does the product and the solution fit compared to risk and value and other things that I've talked to already. So the first one is need. So the customer's concerned or the buyer's concerned about their needs is reasonably high. It grows and then it dies down towards the end. It goes up in the beginning because the customers, they understand that they've got a problem and they're coming to market, but they're still developing the solution or they're developing the problem and issues and challenges they have. And then it dies down towards the end because quite frankly, at the end of a cycle, they're no longer worried about whether the solution is going to work or not because during the evaluation of solution development, they've had all that thinking come to play. The next component is cost or price. Cost starts out about halfway up. It dies down in the middle and it becomes more prevalent towards the end. So if you're talking to an organisation and they're not talking about price, what it might say is you're in the evaluation phase. Typically, we see in the marketplace people very price-centric and price-focused. And in fact, I do posts on this topic quite often on LinkedIn. The mechanisms of price is only really a factor if all the other components in the deal are even. I'm going to get to talk to price a little bit later in terms of uncovering some of the value. The next component is solution. Solution is your product, your offering, your capability. Customers not concerned about your solution when we typically do demos far too early in discovery discussions. Solution starts out lower, then they're focused on cost, then they're focused on needs. So they're really focused when we talk to someone at the beginning of their cycle on what are our needs and do we really understand them properly. Solution is ways down. In the middle slice, obviously while they're evaluating, our solution is the thing that they're worried about the most or concerned about. So our solution goes from quite low to up high. And then solution and need, really interesting on this graph from the TAS group, finish off reasonably low. So ultimately, and again, I say this in a lot of the posts that we do online, no one wants to buy your product, which sounds very damning and damaging, but no one wants to buy your product. The people that make buying decisions all have a business problem or risk they're trying to mitigate. So let's try and understand that risk and then deal with it. So if you look at risk starts out really low because early on when you're sending your people out, there's no risk to their organisation. They're not worried about necessarily any part of that process. Towards the end, risk becomes the number one component, almost twice as important as price. And with risk, I'm going to put value along the same line. So if you're thinking about all the accounts in your current pipeline right now, the organisations you think that are going to make a buying decision, I've got a question for you. Do you understand the risk to their organisation if they do nothing? I'm going to say it again. Do you understand the risk to their organisation if they do nothing? And if the answer to the risk to their organisation is nothing, then they're probably not going to make a buying decision. So risk starts out reasonably low. Good time to start asking about what is the risk in terms of your evaluation, what is the risk to your organisation if you do nothing, and a series of other questions that we look to answer. As I said, it grows towards the end, it becomes the biggest driver. The reason why 90% of deals that slip is we don't understand their risk and or we haven't mitigated it properly or effectively. What we typically have done is spend too much time focusing on our price and our product, not understanding the drivers from the customer, which really is fundamentally the one thing that Sales Director Central focuses on during any engagement. If you want to get a copy of this graph, shoot me a note, my details at the end, happy to send it to you. It's from an organisation called the TAS Group. They've interviewed several thousand people and they've come back with this research. As I said, I really like it because it really puts, in my mind, these four components in with a good filter of it's really not about your product, it's not about your price, it's really ultimately about understanding risk and business value. So what is the only thing we measure in sales? And I asked this, and it's a bit of a coy kind of question. Most people, 99% of people are going to say the only thing we measure in sales is time, but it's not. Is revenue. It's not revenue, it's time. Stop wasting time. If you spend more time in front of a prospect that has to make a buying decision, they've got a compelling event, they've got business risk that if they don't mitigate it, they've got a massive issue that they're going to have. If you spend more time in front of those people, you'll probably sell more and or make your target. If you spend time in front of people who like your software but don't have the right risk profile, don't have a compelling event, then you're less likely to make your target. Let's spend our time with people that have to make buying decisions because ultimately, as I said, that's the thing that's going to get us across the line and give our growth and give the shareholders potentially the returns that they're looking for. So what do we see in the marketplace when we come in and do a review with someone? The first one is that there's no sales methodology. There's no established process for figuring out how to invest in there's no established process for the customer's information to be gleaned. So the sales methodology could be solution selling, target account selling, spin, RSVP selling, Sandler. There's 30 that I listed the other day. You need one. Could be BANT, Strongman, Medic. There's so many different sales methodologies in the marketplace. Find one that suits your business and implement it. And the reason why is because the gut feel, he said, she said conversations around what you did last and what you're going to do next that we've talked to, ultimately that doesn't drive a discussion, doesn't drive a buying decision within your clients. Sales methodology is going to give you another framework of looking at consistent customer data and deciding what you need to figure out next or the questions you need to be asking to drive an opportunity. So that's a really big one. That's our number one thing that we do and implement. We put in a sales methodology to all the clients because it's just going to uplift everything very quickly. The next one is the website is product-based and not business problem. We've talked to that. But everything you do is product-based. Your proposals are product-based. Your presentations, understandably, are product-based. But everything looks and feels like a product and a price. What we're not doing enough of is focusing on what the problem is and what is the cost to their organisation if they do nothing. So if you like, helping that internal person within the customer, within the prospect, get a consensus of change, helping them drive, if you like, a business case to get approved depending upon the size and scale of the product you're looking to sell. So how do we get prospects to better understand what the problem is they've got and start to quantify and qualify what that looks like for their organisation so they can get that internal consensus of change? I've talked about proposals and presentations. 99% of the presentations and proposals that we see are all about us, our company, our product, why we did it, our price, our implementation, other customers. They're all about us. And here's the thing I want you to think about with proposals. Can a prospect get your proposal and say, here's what we want to buy, and send it more internally? The bulk of proposals are too much about us. They don't identify the problem, the issue they have, how much it's costing them. They don't spend any time focusing on that. So the proposal you give a prospect is going to be reworked if they're actually going to go and look to get the business case approved, if you like, and it's going to be put in a different format. Let's write it in that format anyway, and or ask a prospect. So I'm going to give you a challenge other than the website one. For the next time someone asks you for a proposal, and please get them to ask you, don't say, I'll send you a proposal, because that's our process, not theirs. Next time someone asks for a proposal, I want you to ask a question. Firstly, thank you for asking me for a proposal. What exactly do you need in it in order to get a buying decision? So I'm going to say it again. What exactly do you need me to put in this document in order to get a buying decision? The only reason we write proposals, team, is to get a buying decision from the organisation. So why don't we understand more about what they need and then talk and deal to that component? It's interesting. If you're talking to someone who is a low-level person in the organisation, they'll be less likely to understand what to put in the proposal. You're talking to someone higher up, they hopefully will have a better understanding of how they're going to get approval to spend CapEx or OpEx, capital expenditure or operational expenditure, with your organisation. Presentations, similarly. Most presentations that we see are very focused on what we do and who we are, rather than the customer, their problem, how much it's costing them without solving it. And there may be other customers that have exactly the same problem and how they've solved it. So have a little bit of a different filter on understanding the customer. The next one is what we call education versus qualification, or educating versus qualifying. What do we mean by that? Educating is when we want to go and do all these demonstrations because we're educating the client on how to think about the problem. Qualifying is where we use the sales methodology to understand whether they have to buy or not. I don't know about you, but certainly in my business, I don't want to be spending too much time educating the client base. I want to be talking to people around understanding their business problems, some of the reasons they have it, and some of the rationale behind the problem, but then talking to them about how they might solve that, rather than showing them feature function capability that really just gets us to a position of sending a product and price piece across the customer. So stop educating the clients on what we do, start qualifying them and using our questions and our positioning from a pain and problem perspective to drive that conversation. The last thing that we talk about is that most poor performing reps that we see, and I've been consulting now for 16 years, I've been doing this work for well over 5 years. Every poor performing rep knows two things. They know what they're going to sell and how much, and they're super clear on that. Well, the really bad ones don't know, but they know what and how much. What they don't know is why they're going to buy, when are they going to buy, and who's going to buy. So again, swap out the thinking you have of here's the product and here's the price, and start thinking about why they're going to buy it. Why does the organisation need to make a buying decision? Why are they going to buy us? When are they going to buy it? What is their time frame? And who's going to buy it? Who ultimately is going to sign off? And then start dealing with the risk to their business. So again, if you have those, if you have that switch, you'll start thinking about prospects really completely differently. So some of the things that we want you to start thinking about doing differently, and I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but stop talking about your product. If you stop talking about your product, what are you going to replace it with? If you're a founder, start talking about your passion, because your passion is the reason clearly that you started the business, but your passion is going to resonate with a customer because it will talk to the problem they have. And that's the reason why most founders actually do well in the beginning, is it's their passion that gets them across the line. The product certainly doesn't. And as I said there, no one really wants your product. So talk to more about why you're doing it, what the opportunity in the marketplace was, the problems you saw and why you did it, and you'll resonate a lot better than here's the product that we created to solve that particular problem. The next part, and maybe unsurprisingly based on some of the information I've been through with you so far, is stop tracking the sales process. Stop tracking whether we've done a proposal or not, whether we've done a demo or not, whether we've had the discovery meeting, whether they've agreed. Stop tracking all the things that relate to us and start tracking the buying process. So how do you buy Mrs. Prospect? What are the processes internally? Do you have to go through procurement? Is legal involved? Who needs to evaluate and sign it off? Have you got a business case approved? Is there a budget already? There's a variety of things that we would look at differently if we were to look at tracking and understanding the buying process throughout the course of the deal. So really change that paradigm. If you've got a CRM that talks to the sales process, I implore you to change it and start talking about the buying process, because again, it's going to change your paradigm, the way you look at opportunities. And what we want to do is we want to create not a sales environment where we talk about product price. We want to create a buying environment where we talk about the business problem, the business risk. We understand the compelling event. We're going to be in a lot better shape to understand whether deals are going to happen or not at the end of the month, the end of the quarter. So what do we do when we go into an organisation? I've already dealt with the sales methodology piece. We get organisations to get a methodology that is right sized for their business and implement it. As I said, I'm really ambivalent of which methodology it is, but make sure that it's a methodology which allows you to challenge, to stress test what we know about a customer. So I've seen methodologies in businesses where one particular one said we use BANT. And when we did the review of their business, what we discovered was that BANT was in the CRM and it was things that they checked off with, but it really wasn't part of any deal review. It wasn't really part of any of the process they did in discovery. So while they had a methodology, they weren't applying it properly. We want to stress test with a solid methodology. We want to stress test what do we really know about the customer and why are they really going to buy, which brings me to my next point. What is the customer's risk? Do we really understand the customer's risk? So the good news with risk right now is, again, if you think about your pipeline and deals that you believe are going to come in before the end of this month, this quarter, this year, whatever the paradigm is, it's not too late to go back to that customer and say, hey, Mrs. Customer, really appreciate the engagement we've had so far. I'm not sure I completely understand what risk you're trying to mitigate within your organisation. I think it might be this if you have an idea, or we haven't really dealt with that. How can you help me with understanding some of the risk components internally? It's never too late to have that conversation. It typically adds value to the relationship. It's not detrimental to it. Do regular deal reviews. The next point. Regular deal review is when you sit down and you make time to look at an opportunity and you go through a structured approach to figuring out, are they going to buy? What is their access to funds? What is a critical event? What is unique business value? And other phraseologies. What do those things look like from the customer's perspective? Not, and I heard this in the last couple of weeks, not giving them incentive to buy. I wrote a post recently, in fact, this week, which talked about, is discounting killing your business? Too many people rely on the discount to motivate and drive a customer to go forward. A customer will just make that buying decision when they're right. And if you give them a discount, they'll take it and then apply it to their time frame. So do regular deal reviews. Make a commit. What do we mean by make a commit? Making a commit is around getting your sales people or people involved in the sales process to say, this deal is going to close in this time frame. Why do we do that? The more often you're able to commit and meet that commit, the better off you'll be with methodology, the better off you'll be with understanding the drivers from the customer, and you'll more generally create a discipline and a rigor. It's like a muscle. You create a rigor to understanding whether people are going to buy or not. If you can do that more effectively, you'll be able to better predict and therefore better know what revenue you're going to do and go back to the marketplace, to your shareholders, to whoever you need to, and enable them to see the growth potential of the business, which is a really big deal, obviously, in raising capital. And education versus qualification. Stop educating the marketplace. What we want to do is qualify opportunities as effective as we possibly can. So what do we do when we go into an organisation? We typically come in and do, this is our mousetrap. We put the right planning in place. PAMIS is our paradigm or our framework for sales. So P is planning. What planning do you have for your overall target? What planning do you have on account plan level? Most organisations either have lack of it, or if it is there, it's not done in the right mode. It's more, this is the potential addressable market rather than this is how I'm going to make my sales target. A is for accountability. What is the accountability of the rep? What is the accountability of the organisation? And how do we drive that? Methodology I've talked to several times. What are the KPIs? What are the right KPIs or indicators for your organisation? Not one of the lag ones. What are the lead ones that are going to help us drive some more outcomes? What is the deal cadence? How regularly do we meet and talk about customers and their problems and their issues and how we might solve them? And E is for education, all underpinned with value. So if we implement PAMIS within an organisation, we guarantee to increase their revenue, and we guarantee we have more focus on not only risk but also business value as we go through. So the question I have for you as I draw to a close is, what do you need to change within your organisation? What are the things that you've got from this conversation based on the feedback we have, based on the data we have? What are you going to do to add value, to really add value to a customer? Because selling a product doesn't add value. The mechanism of adding value is really, again, measured by the customer, not us. So what are the things you need to do and change? And what are you going to do differently? So if you're excited about the growth and you want to get a 30-minute sales audit from some of the team at Sales Director Central, send some information, send either an SMS to my phone number, which is there, or my email on the screen, and we will do a 30-minute audit. As you may figure out, we're not going to do a sales process. We're just going to figure out how we can possibly help you. As we said to the original slide, our purpose is to change the way the world views sales. So thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and hope to talk to you soon. Cheers.
Presenting now is Giles Carhan, Managing Director at Rocking Horse. Giles will be discussing R&D and government grants.
Hello, everyone, and I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank Wholesale Investor for having me again. Such a great organisation, and I'm really honoured to be part of it again for this year. So I would like to kick off. I will be talking about Rocking Horse and also more generally about R&D and what I'm seeing in this post-COVID, I'd like to say post-COVID world. Vaccines here, and what's going to happen. The crystal ball, I'm going to give it a bit of a rub and see what's coming. So first of all, just I started Rocking Horse 5.5 years ago. For those who don't know me, my name is Giles Carhan. I have been lucky enough to work with close to 400 early stage businesses, some listed, some unlisted, and it's been a really fun and interesting business to be involved in. We've got great partners and great funders, and we've been really able to be able to work with some of the most innovative and exciting companies coming through the Australian ecosystem. We provide R&D loans for companies from anywhere from 30,000 up to the 3.5-4 million. We can finance a lot. But I'll talk more about Rocking Horse a little bit later. So I gave a bit of a talk not long ago about how companies could survive Corona. And I guess things have changed a little. I think we've all got used to the different way of life, and now let's see how we can move forward and what we can do to really accelerate into the, let's hope, post-pandemic world. So I think I agree, and I think the government's coming around, especially, the Australian government seems to acknowledge it, and especially around the world. A lot of countries are seeing as innovation is the key going forward. Social distancing, I don't believe will ever really leave us, at least not for the short term. So working from home, things like that will continue. I think we'll see the way people are working. We've got a lot of people who have now bought houses in regional areas, and they'll want to use those houses. So I dare say that we will see the way that we interact and work and things changing. I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. So technology and innovation is really going to be the key to that. And I think businesses going forward will really, the focus on this will really accelerate. And also the way that we actually do business, how we sit in offices if we're in there, will there be partitions between everyone? It'll be less of a one-to-one collaboration face-to-face rather than online collaboration, I think. And innovation is going to have to be the driver of those discussion pieces between people, being able to be virtually sitting next to someone, virtually being able to interact like you are there with someone. And then we've got to really look at, with the innovation change, where are we? Where's my business? Where's my business in 6, 12, 24 months? Because things are going to change quickly, and companies are going to need to take that and grow with it. So, government stimulus, the R&D is where I focus, and I'm really looking at that as to how the government is interacting with what is such a major program on the innovation landscape for this country. The government has been throwing money left, right and centre at all various things. As you would have seen, the government had pledged another $1.4 billion to the R&D program. And a lot of that was just that it decided not to take it away from the program. But I think it does give us a feeling that, it gives me a feeling that the R&D program is going to be supported in the medium term. I would never say that it's going to be in the long term, but in the medium term, I think the government is supportive of the program, and it sees it as a key pillar to how this country will move forward. I think that without it, it would really struggle to see a pathway forward for what is becoming, even with mining, it will become difficult in the employment landscape. And they're also coming out with other programs and other incentives to try and boost employment. I mean, the EMDG has been increased, which is another good program that the government supports. So I think although we haven't seen what will happen with fiscal tightening in this period where the government's happy to spend, I think the R&D program and innovation has been a beneficiary. So, equity markets, we're seeing, there's a lot happening out there. And there's a lot of IPOs from early stage businesses that are looking to get some liquidity and to be able to spend on that R&D and really grow to the future. Corporate finance teams at all the brokers is flat out. They've never been busier. There's a lot of IPO action and a lot of M&A action, and I think that will continue into the foreseeable future. And what else is the government doing? I mean, we see what the government, the money that's, just coming out in the news the other day is the job seeker. They're going to continue giving, I think it was, they announced, or it's been announced, whether it's official or not, $25 a week more going to that. So I think the government still is very on that program of trying to spend our way out of this. I think the Reserve Bank is still also very supportive of that. So, the R&D program, I think, is in good hands at the moment. I hope that in the long term they don't do anything with it, but I think in the short term it's still pretty good. I think the ATO have been supportive of it as well. I think there was a lot of talk before the pandemic around the ATO and its audit process and how they were clamping down. But I think generally from conversations that I've been having around the market, there's still a real sense that the ATO are taking maybe a more lenient view and trying to promote companies that are trying to commercialise and do R&D and have a real future behind them to help them along, rather than bog them down in audits and the like. So that gets, I guess, to the crux of my talk, and I guess where we focus, and that's on the debt. I think debt has a part to play in any corporate sense of what companies are going to do, how they're going to get through and grow. And in the companies that we look at, that we're really targeting, are early stage, high R&D intensity, trying to come out with a product that is going to change the landscape in their industry. As we're totally agnostic to the industries that we deal in, we're seeing that throughout the market. Whether it be biotech, ag tech, every sort of tech out there. There's a part to play of debt, and I think debt is really becoming more prevalent in the market. I mean, you can see it simply by the number of venture debt funds that are out there now. There's a number of them out there which are providing, again, early stage debt for companies that wouldn't otherwise be able to go to a big four. And it's interesting. I think those are taking up some of the slack from some of the overseas banks that are all coming into this country and then leaving. The latest being Investec, unfortunately, is departing Australian shores, and with it, it'll be interesting to see what they do with their venture VC fund that they have here. It's made a number of investments already, and whether that continues, whether they keep it, whether they what they do with it, I don't know. But I think there are a number of different venture funds, and so I think what we're seeing is this move away from more broad scope lending and broad scope banking into more refined products. So things like venture debt, where Australia has never been a hive of opportunity. And so as a lender myself, I guess, my thoughts around this and how companies can best use it. And use it effectively, not just go, oh, I need debt quickly now. What am I going to do? It's more, my advice is always planning. Plan a year or two of how you're going to get to what you're estimating to be your point. So whether that's an MVP, whether that's a customer base, whatever that is, whether that's a sale, you don't have to hold on to a company till it's $1 billion company. There are a lot of really successful people who have built businesses and sold with still upside for the buyer. And that's one thing that that R&D specialists, guys who have these great ideas, they have many ideas, and to know when to cut it, when to sell it to someone who will be able to potentially do a better job than you, because they have the funds, they have the money to be able to do it. But what you can do is use that is plan. And so when you have an effective plan, you can then have an effective path to get there. So by using debt, by using equity and understanding where the equity comes in and where the debt comes in, and speak to people. Speak, I'm always very happy to give advice on what I see, and when I see that companies might be better off getting equity, better off getting debt, or getting a combination of the two. Investors are always, are generally happy for companies not to have a lazy balance sheet, not to have just more dilutory equity coming in, more dilution. I want to see you use other things like debt, which is not dilutive, which is such an important point when looking at your structure. Is debt doesn't dilute your equity. So it can really, and it can be forecast, and when you've got to make payments, when you've got to, when you've got to raise equity to be able to pay for certain things. You can really have more certainty when you have debt in the stack. One thing that with our product, one fantastic feature is that you're going to be able to pay it back when you claim the R&D benefit from the government with your tax return. So it's such a powerful tool to be able to say, yep, great, we're going to use it for this short period of time, then we're going to pay it back, and off we go again. And you can do that year on year. And it's amazing how many companies that we have come back year on year. Over 5 years, we still have a few of our original companies because they're coming up with new ideas, new R&D to do on top of their foundation product. So I think it's something that I try to impress upon every company that I speak to, and every company that might ask for some advice is plan. Plans change. Don't get me wrong, plans change. But if you can plan what you're doing, you can be more effective in the way that you raise equity and raise debt. Debt obviously is non-dilutive. You can plan for when you have to pay down. You can, sometimes the interest can be deducted from your taxable income. So, there's a lot of positives. Now, can't always get debt. We can only lend against equity that's been spent or other money that's been spent to accrue the benefit from the government. So I'm not saying that you can just come to us and we can lend you all the money you need. You still are going to need the equity, but add it on as a side positive. And also, one good thing is potentially not having to deal with as many shareholders. So what we also provide by financing your R&D is that you can do it multiple times through the year, which not only keeps your costs down, but also provides you cash flow all the way through the year. So you can really spend more through the year that's then refunded by the government. And so that really provides you with that opportunity to plan and execute those plans. And if you decide, well, we're actually now going to pivot onto this other project, why we're doing that, well, we might just raise a little bit more equity and spend that on this other product and borrow against that at the same time. So there's many different ways that you can do it. We're pretty quick these days, which is a real benefit considering we are lending pretty short term, maximum term sort of 12 to 14 months. Most companies were sort of looking at 6 to 9 month facilities. So, we've been able to refine our processes to really be able to, generally it takes about a week to get the cash in your bank. And that can be good when you've got, wages to pay and, you maybe you've had a little hiccup and you've got things you need to, payments you've got to meet pretty quickly. We like to think we're quicker than most lenders out there because it's your R&D and we know how to do it. Facilities can be pretty quick. And that can really help with accelerating your spend in R&D, your growth. It used to be big, eat small. Now it's fast, eat slow. You really need to get into the market and get your product done because there's a good chance with the speed that technology is moving these days, and you need to be the first one to market. because otherwise there's a good chance someone else will be there. And so the other thing I think, what with that speed and what we offer is that that equity, it can take a while. And, everyone says, I'm going to raise this in the next 3 months. Yeah, we generally find when people say 3 months, it's 6 to 9. When people say they're going to raise $1 million, it's first tranche of 250 to 300, and then further on, or it's convertible note, or there are a lot of instruments that you can use to raise more money. But what is a real positive that I see is that space hasn't really contracted because of COVID. I think when COVID happened, we really sat back and went, wow, do we have to stop lending? Is this the apocalypse? And it wasn't, which is great. And I think going forward, I'm really hopeful that we've seen the worst and it wasn't that bad. Now we've got to really move forward. And the great thing is the equity markets, as in raising equity, still possible. There's still a lot of opportunities out there, and there are a lot of funds with a lot of money, especially overseas. We do a lot of work in the UK as well. And companies are going over there now to raise money and do the R&D program over there. We lend money. We lend against the UK program as well. Fantastic program, nothing wrong with it. Equity markets over there are great. Everyone's still in lockup, but even with that, there's still a lot of equity and a lot of companies raising. A company that we lent to for I think 3 to 4 years just raised £20 million. I haven't asked to use their name, but it's so I can't at this point in time. But this is fantastic news for these companies, and I wish them all the best in the future. And that's another thing, being nimble, and the way that we're changing the working environment now. We employ someone in the UK that's actually living in Australia right now, and the people in some of our customers in the UK don't even know that he's in Australia. So this is the changing landscape, and we were able to be nimble. They wanted to come home because of the pandemic with young children and doing that, and I saw it as an opportunity for them. They log on at I think 2 or 3 in the afternoon and they work till midnight. We've got young kids. It's fantastic, and this is about being nimble and being able to change and adapting to the environment. And I think that's one thing that I guess COVID has shown us is there are more opportunities out there. There are other ways of doing things. I'm the first one. I love going out for a coffee. I love sitting in a cafe, eyeing someone, shaking their hand, really having a good, robust conversation. But that's potentially going to have to change. I'm coming around to Zoom, do it, happy with it. But I still love going out and meeting people, and that's just me. But I'm fully accepting of the fact that we have to be able to use these other platforms to conduct our business. Now, look, just a little bit. We have our funding models. We have quarterly. We have short term. We basically, if you've accrued the benefit from the government, we can lend it. Whether it's on a quarterly, whatever, a bespoke model or just a short term, whatever. We're more than happy to we'd love to speak to anyone. And just a little bit about what it can sort of offer and the benefit of it is really the last little slide of the difference in the amount that you're spending through a year is really powerful and can really put you forward on your growth cycle. And my numbers and my name and number and email, and also Simon, who works for me, that is not a misspelling. He does have a J in his name. So if you have any queries, any questions, I've really enjoyed presenting today. I hope you've either maybe heard something or learned something, or hopefully a few of you might see a use for our financing and our funding model. And I look forward to hopefully speaking to many of you, and good luck with the future. Thank you.
Presenting now is Justin Hilford, Managing Director at Bridport Growth. Justin will be discussing 4 steps to accelerating growth.
Hello, welcome to 4 Steps to Accelerating Growth. I'm Justin Hilford and I run Bridport Growth. We specialise in helping companies grow revenue and the value of the business. Before we get into the 4 steps, just a little bit more about us. Are you the rock or the tree in this image? The reality is sometimes you probably feel like you're the rock even though you're the tree, but we know how it started. We started with a seed, some soil, and a little bit of water for the tree. And then over many years of growth, it grew powerful enough to actually split the boulder in 2. It reached a tipping point. Bridport Growth helps companies through tipping points. There are 3 stages where we get involved. Pure growth, where a company has a product and revenue, and we help them prepare for accelerated growth going forward. Growth rejuvenations are for established businesses that may have lost their edge in terms of growth and innovation. And survival turnarounds, the issues appear pretty clear there, and speed is of the essence. What we find in pure growth businesses quite often is that in their desire to accelerate growth as fast as possible, they actually skip steps, and we help them fill in those gaps and build a stronger foundation. Those gaps can actually cause issues down the track for the company if they don't do that. For growth rejuvenation businesses, we certainly help companies prepare for issues that are coming up in the future or are already in the industry or with competitors, plan for them, invest appropriately to get through those tipping points with growth in mind. And then finally, for survival turnarounds, generally the issues are pretty clear, but we're dealing with issues that have been ignored for a long period of time. Getting through these tipping points is really critical for any business. It can either set your business up for decades to come, or it can actually set it back for decades to come. I've seen it many times. We get involved very early to try and help people prepare for those and actually anticipate what is going to happen. So you can't be involved too early. So if you have any issues you'd like to discuss, please call. Here are some engagements that we've been involved in. We are industry agnostic. The common thread through all of our engagements, though, is revenue growth. And here's the examples of revenue growth that we help deliver for these companies. Our view is that every single company can grow. Our view is that every single company can learn to grow, and there is a scientific and structured approach that we have developed to help companies do that. So now to the 4 steps. They learn to live, which is really about learning so you can go from the bottom of the adoption curve to the top, winning customers, making sure that each customer is high value, and then once you've done that, scaling volume or volume leverage. So learn to live to start off with. This is the adoption, a series of adoption curves going back over 120 years. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. You'll notice, though, that the rate of adoption has accelerated considerably in the last 20 to 30 years. So that means for you that learning and the pace of learning is absolutely critical. There are 5 key drivers that help accelerate adoption: a relative advantage, which could be a cost advantage or a function of your product, being compatible with existing values, skills, work practices, for example. It's less work to do. Being easy to use and understand, again, it's less work to do. And being easy to trial and inexpensive, again, it's less work to do. All of those things can help accelerate adoption. Observability, particularly in social media terms, is all about other people being able to see you with your product, observe the benefits and just say, look, I want one of those too. Again, it accelerates adoption. I mentioned the gaps that pure growth companies sometimes have, and what that can mean is that they plateau early. Occasionally, even if it's a first mover, they may get through to the second wave, but these adoption curves mask multiple waves of adoption that are actually going on within the overall industry. There may be 5 as there is here, or there may be 500. Over time, though, new entrants or copycats and incumbents will start to respond. So competition increases. And what happens is that consumers become more advanced and educated and sophisticated over time. Their demands increase. That places challenges on the suppliers. So you've got to achieve breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough. What also happens over this period is that the consumer obviously doesn't see any of that. They just see products that are available to them on the market, and they pick the one that is best for them. The customer changes over time. So you might start targeting innovators and then early adopters and followers. The way you make your product or deliver your service changes. So it can be custom built to productized, for example. How you sell your product changes from functions to benefits to convenience or styling or price if it's commoditized. And the proof points in your business model also change. So from product market fit to customer lifetime value, scalability, and profitability. Again, to emphasize the point, to get through all of these phases successfully, learning is important. So setting up a cycle of learning, and this is just a lean startup model, but where you can build an MVP, launch it, test it in the marketplace, gain insights, preserve those insights. If you need to pivot, and there's many different ways to pivot, ideate that, and again, go back and build an MVP. Your ability to go through a structured cycle time and time again, and then faster and faster and faster, will guarantee that you can go from the bottom to the top of an adoption curve and basically face all challenges. A couple of tips. This is a weekly sprint cycle, and I'd recommend that everyone does this. This is a Tuesday to Monday cycle because the product was released on a Monday afternoon. Releasing products on a Friday afternoon is probably not a great idea. Each team has different cycles, so it could be Wednesday to Wednesday or Friday to Friday. Colour coding just makes it easier to understand, and being clear on deadlines as well. And track every single week what actually is delivered, what isn't delivered as well. So you can understand where you are missing out and go back and make adjustments and learn how to be faster. Now we'll talk about winning customers. Every product and every purchaser has a process that they go through when they're purchasing a new product. So there are some triggers that trigger the need. There are information sources. They evaluate that information. They are then faced with a choice, a category choice or a brand choice. And once they become a customer, they're going to be asking themselves, have you lived up to their expectations? And then down the track, do they want to renew? The reason I mention this is that it's important to intervene at certain points in the purchase process and modify behaviour of people in favour of your business. And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. Here is the more detail. Across the top are different buying triggers, then information sources, next line, and then evaluation methods below that. This is all as a result of significant and detailed surveys that we conduct with our customers. All the information that I'm showing now is actually direct feedback from customers or former customers or future customers or partners, and it's critical to get that fact base in place. What you'll note here with the orange line is that the pathway for a CFO, for example, might look like this. That will be different from a pathway to a CEO, and it will be different to the pathway for a tech team. So understanding who your customer is and what their role is. Are they an influencer, decision maker, or do they hold the budget, or are they an end user, is, again, just one of the things I'd recommend you understand. So in the previous chart, it's really when to intervene and where to intervene. This is who. Once we know those, this is now what matters to them. What matters to the person you're trying to modify behaviour for. On the left-hand side, and this is direct feedback, are purchase attributes ranked in order of importance. So the top one is the most important attribute for government, health and education. In this particular example, speed of response is the second most important. And importantly, there are percentages against here. So with speed of response, you know that it's about a little bit more than 2 times more important than breadth of service. So this just enables you to start to prioritise your effort in how you're improving these things. We'll come back to this. But equally, if you know your customer segment, you'll notice that what matters to government, health and education is actually different to what matters to large corporates, and it's different to small to medium corporates as well. There are differences across segments. There are also differences across demographics, so age. Just because one attribute is the most important for one age group doesn't mean that it's the most important for all age groups. And similarly, male and female differences on the right-hand side. There are many ways to segment the data. Demographics is one, psychographics is another, behaviour is another. And one company I worked with, for example, knew that if a customer came into their pipeline or their funnel on an iOS device, their conversion rate was about 20%. If it was an Android device, it was about 10%. Understanding that level of granularity can help win more customers. Now we know what matters. The reason it matters is that it's a competitive world. So we're adding a competitive dimension here. Across the top are all the competitors for this particular company. And we've asked the consumers to rank or rate all the competitors on every single attribute that is important to them. And these are the results here. Okay, so again, we've asked the customers to rate every competitor on each attribute that is important to the customer. The other aspect here is the crosses across the top represent best-in-class benchmarks. If you want to be the best at absolutely every single attribute, that's where you would be. What we recommend, however, is focusing on the top three. Invest your effort and your dollars in the top three drivers. Put all your actions behind of that, improve those, and once you're the best in the market in those top three, then you can go to number 4. So that covers why it matters, because it's a competitive world. We take all of that information, the attributes, the weightings, and the scores of all competitors, aggregate it into one score across the horizontal axis here, add pricing, noting this is the inverse of price. And then what we see with the orange curve here is the price performance frontier. If you're close to this or on it, this is a lead indicator for market share increases over time. And the ideal position to be is the top right-hand corner, where you're offering a superior proposition for a lower price. That's the best place to be. This particular company has been a client of ours for 8 years or so. And in that time, it's gone from being number 5 in its market to being number 1, and revenue is up about 500%. So it's been a great success story. Lastly, that information at the bare minimum needs to be done for prospective customers, so people that have never been a customer of yours, because that's going to drive growth. For existing customers, because that's going to drive retention, and for lost customers to understand why they left, but also to have a thorough fight with your competitors. We'll come back to that a little later. Now we're going to talk about value leverage. Customer lifetime value, I think you all know this. The elements of CLV are listed here. And I really just want to make 2 points about this. The first one is that to be accurate, all costs need to be included in the right driver here. So, for example, if one of the team spends time answering phone calls or emails or on a chat, even training a chatbot or converting customers, then that time should be allocated to dollars and added into the costs here. That's the first thing. It's got to be comprehensive to be realistic. Secondly, some of these drivers should change over time. ARPU should go up over time. Cost to serve should go down over time. Often customers have issues in the first 6 months. You sort them out. Every interaction with the company costs money. The second year, they have no issues. So cost to serve should go down. So you should see CLV going up over time. But once you understand these metrics at an average level, understand the sensitivities to help with customer lifetime value, and then focus funding or investment and initiatives to improve the ones that have the biggest bang for the buck. Focusing on cost of acquisition now, under the conversion column here, there's just a typical online funnel here. Breaking down conversion stage by stage enables you to micromanage conversion from end to end. So in this particular case, end-to-end conversion is 1.4%. and from a lead to a customer is 7%, but you see highly variable conversion rates from one stage to the next. Focusing on those just means greater insight and greater ability to actually manipulate or bring about a much better result. Focusing on conversion should really be in the bottom half of the funnel. You'll see here that the larger dollars are in the bottom half. So if you lose a customer that is in the bottom half or a potential customer that's in the bottom half of the funnel, it's actually very expensive. So focus, effort, and investments here. And that's really what all this says as well. So you can see that it's very leveraged. Improving conversion in the bottom half of the funnel has a significant impact on cost of acquisition, which equally has a significant impact on CLV. Looking at churn, there's just two examples here. Churn is important for two reasons. One is the direct leverage to CLV. So the example on the top left is a churn of 3.5% per month. The CLV is 20%. On the bottom left, churn is 1% per month and the CLV is $1,300. So there's a direct impact on CLV. Churn is also important because it sends a lot of signals. To potential investors, if you have low churn, it means your customers are happy, and that's a significant signal. It sends a signal to existing shareholders about the value of your current customer base, so some downside protection. If you've got low churn, you've got a customer base that is actually worth something. And it also signals to competitors how tough you are. If you have high churn, they will target you deliberately. If you have low churn, it's going to be very difficult to take one of your customers away. Lastly, track this over time. CLV ideally goes up over time. Ideally, you can say where that came from, whether it's ARPU or cost to serve or CAC or churn. And this is physical evidence that you can give to prospective shareholders or existing shareholders or your board that you're a learning company, that you're really making improvement. Lastly, volume leverage. Leverage in, these are a couple of distribution models. On the left-hand side is a B2B model, looking at sales team, distributors and clients. And on the right-hand side is an online funnel again. Volume leverage in a B2B business comes from the bottom half. Making significant investment in this area will actually make it easier to scale going forward. So this is investment in a sales team, it's investment in training them and the systems that are needed, the cadence, the sales cadence, collateral, sales support, very simple pricing packages, very simple product packages. The greater the investment and the slicker that is, the easier it is then going to be to scale. So in a B2B business, the investment and volume leverage really comes in the bottom half. It's different in a consumer business, a B2C business. The scale comes from actually getting more customers to your app or your website. And there's a couple of examples here. One is ESOP, and they got traffic to their shops and their website by taking a very innovative approach in terms of design of their packaging or design of their shops. That created a lot of content for media and PR, and that PR attracted people to their shops and their website. Nimble had a very different approach. It's a direct response model, which is there's a problem, the customer doesn't have any money, act now, we can give you money within an hour. That's the direct response model. They chose to go down a path of significant television advertising combined with digital marketing, and that worked exceptionally well. The only caveat I'd say about building a brand is that in Australia, at least, it will cost $6 to $8 million a year for about 5 years before you have a well-known household brand that people recognise. Once you understand the scalability or where leverage comes from for volume, there's a whole series of other channels that you can start to play with. So this is all about test and learn, test and learn, test and learn, and just repeat, and understanding where traffic comes from, the conversion rates for every channel, the CAC for every channel, contribution margin, churn, etc. You've got to do this periodically and systematically, because what you're aiming to do is come up with a portfolio mix of channels that maximises the CLV for a given budget. So this is really trial and error. It depends on the business model and what you're trying to achieve, but it is a test and learn approach largely, but with very strict hypotheses to start off with. Lastly, just keep an eye on the difference, what I call the growth jaws, which is the difference between gross adds and churn. So looking at the two examples on the left-hand side here, growth of 5% and churn of 3.5% per month. In 4 years' time, that company will have doubled its customer base. On the bottom left, there's growth of 15% per month and churn of 0.5%. That company will have increased the size of its customer base 60-fold within 4 years, a significant difference. So really understand the jaws and the interaction between those two metrics. Lastly, we've gone through and talked about the need to have learning as culture and the changes in strategy and tactics that occur at different stages of an adoption cycle. We've talked about the purchase process and how different people react differently or have different pathways, and it's important to intervene to modify behaviour at the right time, the right place, the right person. We've also talked about what matters and why it matters, so the most important attributes. So when you're speaking to the right person, you can talk their language that will resonate, and also being better than competitors. We've talked about CLV, that's maximising the valuation of every single company, every single customer that you acquire. And we've talked about conversion and the need to micromanage conversion at every step of the funnel. Equally, we've then talked about leveraging volume. In a B2B business, it's from the bottom up, and a B2C business, it's top down. Both require very significant investments. Lastly, the consumer should see none of that. They should see none of the science, none of the structure. They should really only see beauty, care, and have a great experience. Now, the equivalent in the rock and tree analogy is that the rock had no idea what the tree was going to do over time, and that's the best place to be for any business. That brings this presentation to an end. Again, my name is Justin Hilford. I am offering a free 45-minute consultation. So please reach out, ring me or send an email or contact me via LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to talking soon. Thank you.
Presenting next is Mitch Eady, Director at PwC. Mitch will be discussing R&D and export grants.
Hi, my name's Mitch Eady and I'm a Director in the PwC R&D and Innovation Incentives team in Sydney. My topic today is presenting to you businesses as to certain non-diluted government funding programs that have been increased in scope with the economic policy lens being to reboot from COVID-19. The two main areas that I advise claimants in are in and around the R&D tax incentive and the export market development grant. Both of those levers of economic policy have been extended, as I mentioned, to further tip money back into the economic recovery from COVID-19. Speaking as to the R&D incentive first, what it is it's a tax offset, potentially cash refundable for any company. So you need to be a company to claim that is expending what would be normally tax deductible expenditure on core or supporting R&D activity. What core and supporting R&D activity are activities that involve experimentation, activities that aim to test a hypothesis, that experiment is obviously then carried out in relation to. The backdrop for the hypothesis and the experiment is the aiming to resolve an unknown technical outcome and generate some new knowledge. So essentially blueprints as to design this way across any industry. So the definition of an R&D activity is industry agnostic. that the solution to that problem is unknown or unable to be accessed on reasonable commercial terms at the start of an activity. Should you be able to jump through those hoops, the R&D expenditure items that are incurred on those activities can be claimed at a higher rate than a regular tax deduction allows. The main drivers of R&D costs typically: staff time, cost of experimental materials, cost of third-party contractors, and also decline in value of assets used in experiments. There are certain rules around each of those and the interaction of those with both R&D and general tax, but overall, they're the main areas where we normally assist clients in obtaining the R&D uplift on. What is the uplift is probably the key message from this presentation, and tying back into the extra investment in the program, a change and a positive change in what's occurred. So in FY21, which is obviously the current financial year that we're 4 months away from ending, there are two different R&D rates, and it's a delineation of turnover which determines which of those two rates you're eligible for. First one, for businesses that turn over more than $20 million, in place of your tax deduction, you can obtain a 38.5-cent R&D offset, non-refundable. So usually most businesses in that turnover area, 30 cents in a dollar tax bracket, don't take 30, instead take 38.5. So 8.5% bottom line difference between doing a claim and not doing a claim. The bigger benefit in the program are for businesses that are in the startup to growth phases with less than $20 million turnover, where those businesses typically are in the, say, 27.5 cents or 26.5 cent tax bracket. R&D replaces that with a 43.5% rate, and there's the potential to refund the entirety of the 43.5%, pending how the rest of your tax return kind of washes out. So if you're in tax losses after an R&D add back, you can potentially get 43.5% of your R&D spend back. The changes that have been made law off the back of an initial announcement in the October budget, so the big COVID-19 recovery R&D investment. Big change is the splitting of the non-refundable rate into two different rates. The first one being largely the same as the previous one, should you have less than 2% of your business expenditure being incurred on R&D, so still 8.5% bottom line benefit. The big benefit for growth and R&D intense businesses, even in the maturity stage, 16.5 cents above a tax deduction if you're spending more than 2% of your business expenditure on R&D and your turnover is more than $20 million. Other potential slight benefit in the refundable space, the refundable space largely stays the same, but there's been a kind of a pegging of the R&D rate away from the tax rate. So whatever your tax rate is, whether that changes over time, you're going to get 18.5 cents R&D tax offset above your tax rate plus your tax rate, and you could potentially get the combination of those two cashed out. The reason for that is that the corporate tax rate's dropping over time, so it's just simpler to have an R&D on top of, as opposed to just being a flat rate inclusive of the corporate tax. So I suppose overall, big investment in the program. In recent years, we've seen fairly tough regulation by the ATO and Oz industry in and around what constitutes R&D activities, the evidence of those, nexus of expenditure to those registered activities, and some fairly intense audit activity on those, albeit in limited number. Most audits haven't gone well for taxpayers due to the expectations that the regulators have had on documentation. I'm not sure if that will change in terms of the audit pressure, but as long as you've got your evidence to substantiate the performance of your activities and the connection of your expenditure to the activities, potential bottom line rates are increasing in FY22 and at this stage beyond. So a real R&D advantage compared to what previously existed pre-COVID and pre the budget off the back of COVID. Probably another important point in and around the growth businesses is financiers do exist in the market that will forward fund cash refundable R&D offsets. So if there's anything that can help cash flow wise, where R&D would be that help, and typically you can't get the help until the tax office will give you the money as you lodge your tax return at the end of the year, you can potentially fund throughout the year with certain financiers. So that's an option to just increase the regularity of working capital that can be invested both in the business and obviously on R&D. Process to register. If you claim in a self-assessment regime, you can register the first day after the end of a financial year. You need your documentation in place before you register. You can register all the way up until 10 months after the end of the year. You need to register your activities before you put the R&D costs in your tax return. Notice of registration number will come off the back of the application form being registered. Typically, you will not be able to include R&D numbers at all in your tax return. Without that registration number, it will actually, the software will spit out an error. So application first, numbers kind of concurrently, but then lodge second. If you're spending money overseas, a bit of a different process where you need to apply for and have granted a advanced overseas finding. This is the only way overseas costs can be claimed on overseas activities through the R&D regime. It involves a little bit of a different process, whereas instead of self-assessment, Oz Industry assess claimant eligibility as you apply for the finding, so basically at the start of the project. So that process typically takes a little longer, but the positive of it is if you get a finding that's granted, it gives you certainty of activity eligibility for the duration of the finding. And as I mentioned, the big reason for doing that is should you have overseas spend that relates to Australian activities and also overseas activities, then this is the only way to get the R&D tax effect of that spend in. Big takeaway outside of the increase in rates, evidence and claim governance, super key. Oz Industries' main areas of focus are around evidencing hypotheses, experiment, and technical state-of-the-art research done at the start to determine there's a knowledge gap and what that gap is. ATO, very much interested in the refundable space, in structure, in connection of expenditure, and in the non-refundable, so the larger space, mainly in and around ordinary business activities being claimed as R&D, and again, that nexus of how you identify specific costs to R&D activity. Other main government funding space I work in is in Export Market Development Grant. Again, a year-on-year program. Again, a fairly advantageous program in terms of the percentage of expenditure you can have reimbursed, albeit only up to a fairly small grant number per year. So what the Export Market Development Grant is, again, non-diluted funding, government grant program administered by Austrade that essentially, from a policy point of view, aims to encourage small and medium Australian-sized businesses, so you need to have less than 50 mil turnover as a hard cap to register for the EMDG, to spend money developing export markets. For some reason, those export markets can't include New Zealand and also North Korea, which I wouldn't have thought would be an enormous export market for Australia, but those two countries are excluded. But any country other than those two, wherever you are claiming accounting expenditure on export and marketing, and you pay that expenditure in a given year, within that year, you can claim up to 50% of that eligible export and marketing spend as being you can claim 50% of it, and you can receive a grant on that up to a total grant payable of $150,000. So basically $300,000 of spend, you can get 150 grand back on. What are the categories? The categories and the main ones in terms of, I suppose, the ones we see the most in EMDG claims are listed at the top of this slide. Overseas reps, so basically paying a rep to, whether they're an employee or a contractor, to perform a marketing and export function in a market that's obviously not Australia, not New Zealand, North Korea. They need to fundamentally sit overseas, and you need evidence their job description or the export role in their job description, and you need to have evidence of you paying them what you're claiming. Marketing consultant, again, fairly similar, but more in the marketing than the sales side, typically a external person as well. Marketing visits, back in the days where we all used to travel a lot more, you can claim $350 a day for up to 21 days at a time for trips, and also your air travel. There's a cap on first class costs, but outside of that, all your air travel. Trade fair, seminar, promotion, essentially cost to go to such event cost, exhibition cost. Again, for each of these, evidence of payments are required. Another one where we see a little bit is protecting IP rights to essentially a product being able to be sold or not reproduced exclusivity-wise in a jurisdiction that's not Australia, so basically a national patent. Each of these categories, and there are caps in the top couple, you can only claim up to 200,000 of overseas reps, 50,000 of marketing consultants. The total that you need to get of eligible spend is 305,000. They ruled out the first 5,000. And then once you get to 300, you can claim 150 back. Process to lodge is a lot simpler than R&D. It's a one-stage process, not two. So you need to lodge your application with Austrade 5 months after the end of the year, so not 10 R&D wise. Austrade will then conduct will visit, although at the moment they're obviously virtual, to request a sample of the expenditures that you're claiming at certain labels and basically spot audit the applicability of that to the EMDG categories and legislation. Should the result of that audit be that all the expenditures in, the grant will then be paid up to the 150. It'll be paid in two tranches, typically, if you're claiming more than 100,000. If you're claiming less than 100,000, you'll get one tranche usually in probably December, January. If you're claiming more than 100, you'll get an initial tranche of 100 in December, January, and then roughly May or June after that, you'll get the remainder. Again, evidence of the purpose of the expenditure and the incurrence and payment of the expense paramount. In terms of how long you can claim the EMDG for, you can claim it for up to 8 years. And so you get 8 periods to claim. The first period, you can claim 2 financial years worth in the same year as well. Reason for that, probably logic-wise, is just that often, a large dip in expenditure or increase in expenditure often straddles 2 years. So a genuine EMDG opportunity, there's been some press around that they are going to change the program for FY22, for FY21 operating under the current rules, and you can lodge by July 1. So particularly where you've got overseas reps that are being paid a decent amount, an opportunity here as well. To take away from the overall presentation is that there are 2 areas of funding where there's significant funding that you can get help from, and you can get that help from as soon as July 1 for FY21. Need documentation to be in place before you lodge with either of the programs, because both of them will have some level of questioning asked. But as soon as if you've got the docs and the docs evidence what the program requires them to, then an opportunity to get some non-diluted funding into your business and re-kick that back into the R&D or the commercialisation or the export journey. If you've got any questions on that, I'd love to speak to any of you. I'm sure my details will come around with the presentation, but email mitch.eady@pwc.com. Love to assist any of you guys with any opportunity in either of these two spaces. Thank you.